Jonathan?
Hi, Cliff. How are you?
Good. You're early.
Yes, I know. I wanted to actually listen to the other warrant articles anyway, so I figured I'll stay on.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Cliff.
Lou?
Hey, Jonathan.
Mike, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, Allie.
Well, we are still waiting for a quorum.
Sure. Can you remind me who's on the subcommittee?
Sure, it's myself, Alec, Margaret Robotham, and Elise Couture.
Got it. Thank you.
And here is Margaret.
Jonathan, you're here as a guest of this subcommittee?
Yes, well, to hear, and mine is coming up later, so I was interested in yours, so I figured I'd come early.
Sure. Wonderful.
Okay, so I just want to close some stuff on my computer here. Well, welcome everybody. This is a meeting of the school subcommittee of the advisory committee. Tonight we're going to be having a public hearing and public meeting on Articles 12 and 24. And then we're going to, after that, have a continuation of our meeting on Article 23. We have a quorum, although we're not all here. Elise, I assume, may join us in a little bit. But since we have a quorum, we can get started. And Alec and Mike, where do you want to begin?
Sure, I think we can jump right in with 12 and 24. And I think if it works for you, Cliff, I'm happy to just give a quick overview of both of them together up top. And then we'd be happy to move to questions and discussion. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that certainly works for me. Margaret, is that okay with you?
Yep.
Okay.
Great. So warrant article 12 and 24 are, we think of them as companion articles, and they both seek to improve transparency around the town's approach to public records, compliance and public records law. This comes in the broader context of what I would really charitably describe as a complete breakdown in public records transparency across the Commonwealth. Folks may have seen there were several front page Globe stories in the last few months highlighting this. One of the key factors being that when a town or municipality is in non-compliance with public records law, there's supposed to be administrative appeals oversight for that from a position housed in the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. That position and the Secretary of the Commonwealth more generally, as we discovered in preparing these articles, have no enforcement authority. They do hear appeals on municipal violations of the public records law, but they don't have direct enforcement authority themselves. Instead, enforcement at the state level relies on referrals to the Attorney General's office. And it was reported in the last 2 months that 3 years ago, the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office completely ceased referring these cases to the Attorney General's office, meaning the current legal environment practically that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is in means there is no enforcement mechanism for the public records law. So that, I think, as proponents of transparency and good governance generally, seemed a major issue to myself and Mike. And one of the things that we were determined to see is if the state does not consider enforcement of these laws important or appropriate enough to prioritize, that it would be incumbent on municipalities to take greater actions locally to improve transparency and compliance with both the letter and spirit of the public records law. And so what we've proposed here is both a new bylaw and a resolution calling for some administrative changes to how we proactively seek to comply with the public records law. Article 12, the new bylaw, seeks to improve transparency around the public records request process generally, but also to create a public incentive for the town to more readily comply with public records law by requiring that the town make public on the town's website both public records requests that they have received and ultimately what was sent to the requester in response to the request. Obviously, assuming that the request is lawful, and of course, any request that would be unlawful or exempt from the law would not be included in the response piece because no response would be given by the town clerk's office. Meanwhile, warrant article 24 seeks to address a different issue, which is the fact that the town meeting model has proven very difficult to proactively preserve public records within. So one thing that the select board has attempted to do in recent years, and we laud them for this, is rolling out their updated boards and commissions guidance for their appointed members of town bodies. One of their suggestions, but not requirements, in this updated policy, as it was most recently updated in 2025, calls for appointed members of town boards and commissions that were appointed by the select board, I should clarify, that they CC the board archives at brooklinema.gov email address on any official town business related communications that they undertake in the fulfillment of their appointed role. The reason for this is any of those communications, again, with the caveat that they be doing official town business, even if sent from a personal email account, do qualify as public records under state law. And therefore, both the individual and the town have a legal responsibility to preserve them for several years. We've had concerns raised several times in recent years about the lack of preservation of many public documents because town meeting members and appointed body or board and commission members are not given town email accounts. And I will note that Mike and I did explore whether it would be appropriate to request that the town provide those accounts to town meeting members and appointed board and commission representatives, but ultimately decided on the warrant article 24 approach we took because the costs associated with providing those email accounts would have been prohibitive. It would have been over $400 per account based on estimates produced for us by the town CIO, Yang, who I see is on the call. So what we call for in this resolution is for the select board to revise their guidance to their appointed body members to go beyond just encouraging the use of the board archive and actually making that a requirement. And further, we request in the resolution that that same requirement be extended to appointed board and commission members from different appointing authorities, namely the moderator, with the goal being that all town bodies that are conducting town business and therefore subject to public records law take this proactive approach to preserve those records and bring us into better compliance with both the letter and spirit of public records law. So I think that's the nutshell explanation, and we're happy to take any questions and discussion from there. Oh, sorry, Cliff. You're
Cliff.
You're muted, Cliff.
Thank you. So I was eating an apple. I didn't want to ruin everybody's meeting. So this is a public hearing, and so there are several folks from town government here who I think would like to comment, and I will call on them in no particular order, maybe alphabetically. So Joe Callanan, town council, would you like to give us your comments?
Good evening, Joe Callanan, Town Council. Sorry I was late. I was on another AC subcommittee meeting, but now I'm with you guys. The one thing that I want to point out, and Ben and Fong can add more, is the problem with this request is our upcoming requirement to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act as to our website. And that would mean that any of our public records request responses, which are typically PDF files, that we would have to post on the web versus mail or email to the requester, would have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We would have to make sure the PDF is OCR'd. Any image on it would have alt text. Any table or heading needs to be labeled, both the columns, the row, the table. So in anticipation of this compliance, we've gone through to make sure that things that are on the web now comply. We haven't been able to do that with existing staff resources, so we've had a contractor that has done this work for us at a cost of $4 per page. So I gave some examples, and I can pull them. Sorry, I'm on my phone here. But I gave some examples of just kind of like typical public records requests that we would do, and being hundreds of pages and having hundreds of problems with compliance with the ADA. We wouldn't have the staff resources to be able to do this in-house. We would also need several licenses for software such as Adobe Acrobat, which is about $250 per year per user. We have probably about more than a dozen RAOs throughout the departments, so that'd be several $1,000s just for Adobe. We need another software package to be able to do these corrections. Adobe would identify the accessibility problems but doesn't fix them. To do them by hand, like I said, there's hundreds in just like a court case that I used an example of in a brief. We wouldn't have the staff resources to do those by hand, so we would need separate software to do this through kind of like AI generated software. We don't have those resources. We don't have that software identified. But if we were to do the kind of outsider contract solution at $4 per page, one example is the town meeting members' emails. We produce those to Brookline News each month now in response to a public records request they did several years ago. Last month's production you saw in Brookline News, that was 1,187 pages. So at $4 per page, just that 1 month would be about $5,000 if we were to send it to an outside contractor. I was running it through our accessibility, checker through Adobe. I have Adobe Acrobat, but again, not all RAOs would, so we would need to buy that software for everybody. There are over 1,000 different problems with just that one email or that one PDF. Some of them were identifying images. So for example, sometimes town meeting members will send to the listserv an invitation, to some neighborhood event. That's an image that would have to go in manually, and then you'd have to type in the alt text for that image. Sometimes it's, things like the color of people's fonts would have to be corrected and made accessible. So for example, you might have remembered Arthur Conquest had a bunch of Black History Month posts, but in honor of Black History Month, he had it with red, green text. We would have to go in and change all of those by hand. Any table would have to have its, again, rows described, columns described, and a heading described. Again, that would all have to be hand done. So I think, the petitioners have a very, laudable goal, but they don't understand the implications both cost-wise and staff time-wise, that if we were to do this, would require us to comply with other laws if this new bylaw were to be enacted.
So I have a kind of a related question to that. And I appreciate the example. I think you also mentioned at one point that you get over 400 public records requests every year. I'm wondering if you've thought about going and looking at, okay, let's just take, fiscal 25, and go back and see what this would have cost if this law were in place, to be able to give a broader ballpark estimate than a single document, or some anecdotes about several documents that obviously raise concerns, but it's really hard to sort of put it in context as to what we're really talking about here.
Cliff, I'm happy to take and address that. The current system used to handle public records requests is called FOIA Direct. That's our vendor who runs our software package. And within that, we can go in and we can see for individual requests how many documents were provided, but it doesn't give us an option to see the page count. They don't have that functionality. So I went and I looked and I could see how many documents would be part of a request, but I could not see the actual page count numbers. For example, I went into a fairly standard request for the building department. Somebody was looking for information about a construction permit. And, there were about 100 responsive documents. Many of them were building plans or things like that. But also some of them were multi-page contracts, multi-page contractor reports. So we're able to see the number of documents, but we don't have a way to actually see the number of pages. And because the estimate is a per page cost, we wouldn't be able to get you kind of an accurate count on that.
Sounds like a summer project for an intern.
Perhaps in a summer when we don't have multiple elections, indeed.
Alec, you were gonna.
Yeah,
Nick-
so this is definitely helpful information, and appreciate town council sharing this. And as I mentioned before, I think we're trying to be very sensitive to cost and administrative burden here. This is why we didn't go the email accounts for town meeting route, as I mentioned. Just listening to Joe just now, what strikes me as what might be a potential compromise to address some of the cost concerns and administrative burden concern, and still get at the kind of core ask that I think we've built into Article 12 is, what if instead of posting the actual documents, we amended 12 to read that the town would post both the request they received and a summary of materials provided in response. That way, they wouldn't need to proof the documents to meet the new ADA standards, which I know are coming, and instead would post, to Ben's point, if the example were the building plans and permits for this project where 100 documents were provided, rather than say, here's, accessible versions of each of those 100 documents, they could simply say the town in response provided 100 documents, including building plans, permit, registration forms, et cetera, et cetera. And what that would then allow is it would remove the need for the additional staff time and costs to come into this new ADA mandate compliance. And what it would also do is, I think it would keep with the original intention of the article, which is it would show the public to what degree the town is being responsive to these requests as they come in. And it would also allow members of the public to be aware from this web posting that should they have a specific interest in one of these requests that's already been fulfilled, all they need to do is submit their own public records request, and presumably those records would have already been prepared for the preceding request and could be provided in short order. So I'd be curious, maybe if town council has any thoughts on that proposed model.
So Joe Callahan, town council. So it would be less onerous. It would be less, expensive. But also it's a commitment of staff time, because preparing that summary is a new task. So, what is that going to take? Even if it's 5 minutes, for each of the 400, you're now talking, 20 hours of work. If you told me I would get 20 hours of extra staff time complying with the public records law, I'd spend it on having 20 hours of staff comply with public records requests more timely. I saw on the town meeting member listserv, complaints about how we don't get back to people. I don't know of an actual request that we did not get back to someone. I know many requests that we don't get back to people timely. So I do think we have a problem with responding to public records requests timely. But I will also remind folks that we're actually pretty good compared to other communities, because that town meeting member listserv discussion was prompted by a Globe article criticizing other communities for their public records requests. There was a Boston Globe article criticizing us, the town of Brookline, for its public records request, but in that case, the person did get their request, and they might have complained about how long it took, but that was because most of that time was spent not paying the fee estimate that we gave them. So once they paid their fee estimate, they got their records within about 6 weeks. I shared with AC an example of a public records request that I had sought from 6 other communities to try to get an idea of what other communities have paid for a type of educator misconduct case that we were facing. So I identified 6 communities that faced the exact same type of claim. They had settled the case, and I had sent it to the 6 communities, both the school side and the town side. And in those 6 communities, none of them gave me the information I was looking for. I wasn't asking for every email that the superintendent received over a week, which was what the request, that was the subject of the Boston Globe article criticizing Brookline. That was her request. I was just asking for what the dollar amount was they paid out of taxpayers' fund for a settlement. I wasn't looking for the identity of the teacher. I wasn't looking for the identity of the minor. I wasn't looking for, hundreds of documents. I was looking for one data point. And 6 other communities never got back to me. 2 hired lawyers to call me, and the lawyers, I both know and I have a good relationship with, and told them exactly what I was looking for. And they said, oh, okay. And then never called me back, nor never gave me the information. One community said, we don't have any responsive documents, to which I gave them the document they filed in federal court to say that they settled the case. And I said, did you lie to me or did you lie to the federal court, essentially? And they never got back to me. So I understand Brookline residents think that we should do a better job, but I also want you to realize we do a very good job compared to the other 350 communities. Could we do better? We could always do better, but we could only do better with more time and resources, which I'm not sure people are ready to provide to us by hiring, for example, a full-time dedicated public records person like the town of Framingham has, or, the half an FTE that Ben says that we would need, or even, in this circumstance, the compromise that you propose, that would be, a tenth of an FTE. Again, if I had a tenth of an FTE devoted to public records requests, I would devote it to responding more timely, not adding a new task to responding to public records requests.
Mike.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for convening this evening to talk about our proposal. So part of the issue here that makes it a little bit difficult to navigate through has been a little bit of vagueness regarding the costs, the time, and so on, which town meeting should have a sharper estimate than we might need a few software licenses of this and of that, and it would take some amount of time for some amount of pages. So I think in terms of moving forward, it would behoove the AC process to actually provide the petitioners and AC with some sharper estimates. It could be a range, of course, that's fine. of what we're actually talking about. So that would be one thing that I would request. The other thing that makes it difficult is we're talking about accessing information that we, Alec and I, cannot see. And so I guess I do have a question for our town clerk, who I think is the one who is kind of the relationship manager on FOIA Direct, given Ben chimed in a moment ago. On other instances of FOIA Direct, for towns that and municipalities that do provide the information we're asking for, and which is included in our article explanation, we provide some examples. They show that for those towns, when you click on a request, it has a summary of the requested content, who asked for it, when, and so on. And then in the response details, it says the response date, the response department, and opportunity for summary of the type that Alec just mentioned, which sometimes just says, please see attached report, which doesn't seem like 5 minutes of time. That seems like 30 seconds of time. And then it does include the documents, which is where we're basically seeking to sort of replicate those approaches. Now, I understand from town council that there's this new law coming through. It'll be interesting to see whether these other towns go dark or scale back under the fear of not complying with the American Disabilities Act that we're hearing tonight. But I guess my question for Ben is, are we already logging in the system, like other towns are, the request details, the request submitted, the request name, the requested department, the requested content? And are we doing anything with regard to the response details with the date, who the department was, and so on? So because I can't see it, I can't know. So I think I need to ask Ben, what are we already doing so we can distinguish what are actually additional tasks versus what is just making visible the tasks staff already is engaging in?
Sure, I'm happy to address that. The first thing I just do want to give a caveat on is I believe some of the communities that you cited, they don't use FOIA Direct. They use another software, Next Request. I at least know that's what Newton does because I was involved with the public records request that I submitted to them. So I'm going to tell you what I know from FOIA Direct. I can't necessarily speak to if these other communities are set up the same way. FOIA Direct has this functionality. They essentially have a way that you can mark an individual request as private or public. When you post it as public, you post it with the same information that we get on the back end, which includes the requester's name, address, phone number, email, the content of their request, which sometimes is something that they typed into the box, sometimes is a document that they uploaded, and then would have the response information, the department that responded, the time of the response, the details in the email sent in the response, which frequently just says, if requested documents are attached, and then it has the documents. One of the problems with how FOIA Direct operates, so one of the costs and one of the staff obligations that we would have is redacting the information included in the request itself. So when somebody submits a public records request, the information in there is public record, but itself is subject to the exemptions under the public record law, withdrawing personnel information, personal identifying information, and on the content of the request itself could actually necessitate a redaction of the entire request. If it's a request related to a personnel issue, something like that. So there's a staff time commitment that we need to be made to actually redact that information from the request itself. This is the problem with the FOIA Direct system. The FOIA Direct system allows a binary functionality. You can either mark that a request is public and the entire request is public, or you can keep it private and the entire request is private. We do not have a mechanism within FOIA Direct to redact information on the requester's information before we make it publicly available. So I am not, my understanding from FOIA Direct is that we would not be able to simply flip the switch and turn that functionality on because we would still need to redact that information, and therefore we'd likely need to post it on the website in a different format or in a different form. And that is something that would certainly have staff and other costs associated with it.
So, sorry, I'd lost a little bit of the thread. So my specific question is whether you're currently logging this information in the system.
This information is currently logged into the system when the submitter submits the request. They put it in.
And it's your perspective, or perhaps town council's perspective, that the requester's information needs to be redacted? Because that's not how other towns are doing it. For example, Framingham, you see who the requester is.
So not who the requester is, but there's frequently information within the request itself that would be subject to exemption. So for example, we do get public records requests actually asking for a list of all submitted public records requests. That is itself a public record. We've only had 2 of those in my time here. One of them was from a vendor who was looking for information about Brookline, and the other was actually from Brookline News. And for example, in the Brookline News one, there were requests that were pursuant to a personnel issue or personnel question. And in that case, we would need to redact within the request the information that is subject to exemption.
So that redaction has to happen when you provide the record, whether like if for example, Brookline News requested all of the public records requests over the last 6 months. In order for you to provide those public records, you have to take the time to redact them as necessary.
Correct. We redact them and then we charge for the time that it takes for us to redact them.
Got it. And so then, after you've taken the time to redact them, posting that seems, but for the disabilities issue, at least the redaction piece is taken care of if someone actually files a public record request and you're responsive to it.
So that would be if somebody filed a request for the same information over the same period of time. We
Yes.
provide that on a rolling basis. That is typically at the end of the year they do. It's only happened once from Brookline News. It happened once from one other person that they do that request. If we were to do it on a rolling basis, we would have to spread out that time commitment over a much longer amount of time, and it would you would lose the efficiency of scale of being able to just sit down and do it in one fell swoop.
Got it. Does the American Disabilities Act new requirement that town council mentioned, is that restricted to the responses of public records that are on the website, or does that also include responses that people ask for that you provide directly?
So Joe Callahan, town council. So if someone was asking for information and we didn't give it to them in response in an accessible manner, they can then, as a reasonable accommodation, ask that we provide it to them in accessible format. So not every response needs to be ADA compliant. However, when we put anything on the website, all of that needs to be ADA accessible. So right now, after I think it's April 26th when this law comes into effect, we can still produce responses that are not ADA accessible. But in the future and in the past, if we gave somebody something that wasn't OCR'd, sometimes there are things that aren't OCR'd. If they said, hey, can you make this accessible? We would only have to make that one accessible. However, after April 26th, if this bylaw were to pass, everything would need to be ADA accessible.
Got it. Okay, great. Super helpful. Thank you. The last question I have, if I may ask one final question, to Ben, you had mentioned that you've gone through this for a request from either the vendor or from Brookline News. I wonder if you can provide us a ballpark estimate for the period of time, I don't know if it was 6 months or a year, 200 or 400 record requests. What was the collective time to do the redaction?
Certainly. So the request was from Brookline News, and it was just asking for the name and the content of the request for each request submitted in 1 calendar year. And the time estimate that we had for me doing those redactions was approximately 12 hours of work time, which is 2 hours. The first 2 hours are free, and then it'll be 10 hours above and beyond that on a standard public records request. And that was for redacting just information within the submitted request itself. The request did not actually ask for any of the responsive documents. It just asked for who submitted a request and what was the content of that request. I will note there was one request in there as well that was redacted at my discretion without a citation in the public records law because it contained a topic that I felt was inappropriate for me to share. I notified the requester of that and informed them that they could appeal that if they wanted to. They understood my reason for withholding that. I'm not sure in the context of the proposed bylaw if I would have that discretion. And I would have concerns about the possibility of potentially discouraging somebody from submitting a public records request on a sensitive topic if they knew that that information was going to be posted on the website.
Okay, so I'm gonna leave that corner case alone for the moment and speak to the main. So for the 10 hours that you billed, what was the total bill then? I don't remember the rate that you charge.
It's $25 per hour is the standard rate, even though my pay would be higher than that.
I should hope so. So, okay, so then to summarize, the redaction cost, well, I'm gonna add actually the 2 hours that you said were for free. So 12 hours times $25 an hour, we're up to $300. Although we probably want to do your staff time. I'm trying to get a sense of like what's to Joe Callahan's point. If this is going to be costly to staff, I want to get like a ballpark how costly if we restricted our attention to the request portion that would need to be redacted for you collectively to feel comfortable posting it on the web. So what ballpark cost estimate can we use for a 12 hours of staff time? Not sure it has to be the town clerk or someone on your staff. I don't know who actually does the work typically.
So in the proposal that you have before you, it's not, or that's before the committee, it's not a kind of one-time sit down and crank through all of the requests. It's kind of an ongoing for each
Yes.
request going ahead and doing this. And the best estimate based on my experience of redacting these is that they take between 15 and 30 minutes to do that redaction, depending on the length and complexity of the request. It would likely be done by the RAO for the department who received that. In many cases, that department RAO is actually the department head. It is likely that they would be the ones who would be doing that. But assuming 480 requests last year and between 15 and 30 minutes of time to redact for each of them as they came in.
So to summarize, are you saying it takes 15 to 30 minutes to redact the request?
That would be my assumption under the bylaw that you proposed, that it would take 15 to 30 minutes to do those redactions for somebody who's not doing them in one fell swoop and not me, the one who's doing them.
But what don't many of these not require any redaction at all?
Almost all of them require some redactions because many of them will include things like phone numbers and emails, which would need to be redacted.
And this is currently not being redacted if someone like when Brookline News asked, or that is the redact, you did those redactions somehow in 12 hours for 400 because you did them in batch.
Correct. I could use a much easier Control F function for an @ symbol to do redactions as opposed to having to go through them in a slower pace.
I see. So your new estimate would be basically 3 per hour, if that's 20 minutes. And so it would go from what you did, which took 12 hours, to your new estimate is 133 hours, 10 times more time.
Yeah, doing them one at a time and doing them not with the town clerk who is able to do things a little bit quicker because I'm very familiar with that process and was in the rhythm of doing them in that process. And all that I was redacting was the name, all that they wanted was the name and the actual content of the request. They weren't asking for any of the other information related to a public records request. Phone number, email, address, all of that other stuff, which would also need to be redacted.
Okay, thank you.
But if I could just chime in for 1 second, Mike, I think what you're not, we are overlooking with between the response and then making the request available. If we produce a response, that's going to be redacted and they're going to, have a fee estimate and things like that. But you're also wanting the request to become public. But right now we don't produce those and we don't redact those because that's just an exchange between the requester and us. So they might have their name, address, and phone number, but when you have 2 of those data points, that's personal identifying information. So we don't have to redact, Mike Toffel and his personal email address when we're dealing with you. But now when you want that request to become public, every time you have your name and email or name and phone number or email and phone number, we have to redact that because that's on the request that we wouldn't otherwise be redacting. We redact in the response because those are the public records.
So I understand. So I've moved away from the response given the American Disabilities Act concern, and I'm actually, yes, now just talking about the request. But so too was Ben when he was referring to the request made by Brookline News, which was just
Right.
a request for the requests.
Right.
It was a request.
That's the 12, as I understood it, unless I'm wrong. That was the whole conversation that we just had. The 12 hours, which would turn into 133 hours by the latest estimate, was just on the request side. Am I correct there? Just to make sure, Joe and Ben, that we're all talking about the same thing, because I'm not talking about the responses here.
Sure, I'm happy to clarify on that one. That was for a request that was made for very limited information on the request side. All that was requested in that situation was the name and the content of the request. If there was additional information if the entire request data set was looked to be made public, then that requires additional redactions beyond it.
So can you be specific what you mean by the difference between what Brookline News was provided and what you're saying is the entire request? Because again, because I can't see this database, I can't look at variables. So I have to ask you to be specific.
Sure,
So okay, but Ben, before you do that, is it possible to see an example? Actually, to see one, because we're all trying to picture in our individual brains what it is you're saying, and I think that's causing some confusion.
So it's fairly simple. The information that we take in when somebody submits a request, they submit their name, address, email, phone number, and the content of their request, which sometimes is just them typing in the box and is sometimes including an attachment. The request that came in from Brookline News that we responded to just had the name of the requester and the content that they put in that box. It didn't include this other information. The proposal that is on the floor would be to make all of that information included in that request, and that information would need to be redacted because that information is personal identifying information. We're providing a name, we would have to redact phone numbers, emails, and addresses. We would also have to redact sensitive information within the contents of the request itself, if any of that fell subject to the public records law. And in the case of one of them, I exercised my discretion on redacting an entire request, even though it was not subject to the public records law.
For my benefit, is an RAO the responsible administrative officer? I mean, what does that term stand for?
Sure, an RAO is a records access officer. In many communities, they have a single RAO for the town. They're usually a full-time employee, or if it's a small community, a part-time employee who's responsible for all of the public records that come into the town. In Brookline, we don't have that. What we have is we have departmental RAOs. Each department has a records access officer, and when a request comes in, it's assigned to that department, and that department then is responsible for the response to it. They would also likely be responsible for the redaction process on these. So each department has its own RAO, and that skill set and that timeliness will change based on them, which is why I said in this situation, I would not be the one doing those redactions. Instead, departmental RAOs would be, and that would be an increase in their time obligations and complying with the public records law. And I will note, because there's not going to be an additional staff member, presumably that's taking time away from their normal responses to the records if they're instead having to spend it doing these redactions.
So, Cliff, to your question, in the petitioner's explanation, we do have a screenshot from FOIA Direct, which is the system that Ben mentioned Brookline does use, in Figure 2A and Figure 2B, which show screenshots of what at least it seems like the default, perhaps. It sounds like it's fairly non-customizable from Ben's description. Of what FOIA Direct provides. So I can share it on the screen, or you can refer to the petition.
I thought Newton didn't use FOIA Direct.
I said Framingham.
Oh, I see you said 2A and 2B. Okay,
I'm sorry.
Okay, but Framingham, you're right. They're both labeled 2A and 2B.
I will say 2A and 2B refer to City of Newton next request. So I don't think
Sorry, next
That's-
page. Turn the page. Keep
Okay.
going.
Yeah.
I apologize.
We need to correct some labeling, but
It's
it's
okay.
the
We've got the
second
number.
2A,
I get-
2B.
I get
Oh,
now.
okay. Sorry. I see what you mean. Second
Apologies.
2A, 2B under Framingham. Thank you.
Sorry.
So did I hear earlier that Framingham has a full-time RAO?
That's what I heard.
Correct. That's my understanding.
Okay, so in Newton, the service that Newton uses, since FOIA Direct seems to have some challenges, have you looked at whether or not the system that Newton uses is better?
So there are two systems, as far as I've been able to glean from my research on this topic, that do public records systems like this in Massachusetts, and those are FOIA Direct and Next Request. FOIA Direct is what Brookline has had since I've become clerk. It was established before I came on. So I have not experienced what Next Request functionality is like. But I would imagine, based on my interactions with the Newton system, that it's a fairly similar system. It asks for the same request. What I don't know is their functionality on making information public in the way that Mike's describing, where I know that FOIA Direct does not give us partial functionality. It either says make the entire thing public or do not make the entire thing public. I don't know if Newton's gives a partial functionality.
I suppose it's worth finding that out. Before, I want to make sure that that Fong has, if she has any comments that she'd like to make. We haven't called on her yet, so.
Good evening. Hi, Feng Yang, CIO. The only comment I have, I think Joe and Ben have, really described very well, the challenges and the cost and the time staff has to spend. I also want to second the sentiment that Joe mentioned earlier. I do think Brookline does a really good job among, compared to a lot of communities in many, many aspects. And in this space as well. So, and as you can see, every department is so careful about data privacy and data security, data protection, and that is to a CIO. That is wonderful news that we've trained our staff well who care about data privacy. So I just want to say that. But thank you, Cliff, for calling me. Give me a chance to speak. Yeah, but I think Joe and Ben covered very well. And on the other article, and Alec and Mike, we've already had multiple conversations. So unless you guys have any other questions, but I'm here. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks.
Thank you.
My questions, I know we've been talking about numbers. I just want to make sure that I have them all together. Let me bring up my spreadsheet. Okay, so when I'm thinking about basically the ongoing cost of staff time to actually accomplish these redactions, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page from what the town is saying would be marginal cost to the team. So just so I'm understanding, Ben, last year there were 480 requests made for public records. And so if we assume the same number a year, you are estimating it would take each RAO in each department roughly 15 to 30 minutes per request. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be my estimate of the amount of time.
Okay. And are we still estimating $25 per hour roughly for those RAOs?
So the $25 per hour is the cost under the public records law that we're permitted to charge for a public record request. The RAOs are almost exclusively paid higher than that, many of them significantly higher,
Okay, so
because they're department heads. So in terms, if you're looking for the hourly rate of those employees, it's going to be considerably higher than $25 per hour. $25 per hour is the rate under the public records law that we can charge for the work that we do.
So,
Okay.
so I would say that's using $25 is not the right number to use, because what we're interested in
that's
is
clear.
the staff cost and the opportunity cost. And that would be
That's
not
revenue. So
just-
that's $1,200 a year we'd be bringing in.
what, so that would be not just their salary, but also the benefits that go along with them. So like a fully loaded cost, it would be interesting to have an estimate as to what what the cost is that the town is going to incur. And there's no revenue associated with this though, because
Correct.
this is
Oh,
so
we're not charging. I thought, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought we were charging
it's
$25.
for the public. This is for the
No.
public.
No, if this were a request submitted by a member of the public as a public records request, we would be able to charge for it. If it's a bylaw that we're complying with and just posting the information,
Understood.
there would
Correct.
be no revenue associated.
Correct.
So the hours worked is the estimated staff time that would take to do this. And I think the kind of other caveat on cost that I would give is the redactions that we're talking about are not possible within the current FOIA Direct system. So we'd also be having to create a separate system or process where that is happening. And that would also have to be ADA compliant. The current way that we do it is we do it as when I did it for Brookline News, it was in the form of an Excel sheet that we sent out. I would have to defer to Fung on the functionality, and I guess I would also defer to Mike on if that's what he's envisioning of, is it posting an Excel sheet on the website with that information? How does that comply with ADA requirements, and what would that all look like?
Okay. No, that's all helpful information. I'm just trying to create some sort of baseline just to understand, like, if we were to pass this bylaw tomorrow, what would it look like for the town? So I think I'm hearing you very clearly of all the operational challenges. I'm trying to make sure that whatever I'm writing down is correct. So I'm hearing that there's no revenue associated with this because if it's a bylaw, we can't charge $25 per record.
Correct.
Okay, is that fair? So, okay, correct. In terms of cost, 480 requests. I'm going to use that as my baseline, 15 to 30 minutes. I know that you probably aren't prepared to bring this into the conversation, Ben, but if you had to tell me like estimated base salary for like a general, I know like, if just like to throw a number out there for the purposes of just creating a baseline for one of these ROAs, like if you just again, I'm not asking for a particular person's salary, just like if you could give me a number just so I can understand approximately what this would be, like what number would you be comfortable sharing?
Can I, to that point, maybe Anne Braga, who's head of HR and is here with us, maybe if most of the ROAs are department heads, which is what I heard earlier, is it possible to understand sort of like on average for the town, all the department heads, what the department heads compensation is? And we can use that as
Perfect.
as an average with benefits, by the way, fully loaded. I want to understand the fully loaded cost.
Okay. Well, I don't have it off the top of my head.
That's okay.
But I am.
We can follow up. We can follow up.
Yeah, I
Okay.
can follow up. And if you don't have the fully loaded, even if you just have the salary, I can at least take that and multiply it by like 1.35 or something. Or in Brookline, 1.4.
That's me. We're 1.25, whatever it is. So
I don't think we're not 1.25.
I don't know what we are.
We're not 2.5.
So could I?
Okay, so
I can follow up with you offline.
And Margaret will follow up with you.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you. If you could find it for the end of the call, I would be appreciative. But I will follow up with you offline. And then I think we've gone over estimated staff hours. And then I think this one is also clear to me. This one's not clear to me. It sounds like, so it's been made clear, FOIA Direct cannot accommodate this. We'd have to also add in a new process. Would there be any additional cost in terms of to FOIA Direct or otherwise outside of staff time we need to accommodate and consider?
Licenses for.
No, yeah, for Adobe. I think you guys said,
Yeah, so
pointed out $4 per page per a contractor. And then you also pointed out $200 per Adobe Acrobat per year per person.
253.
253.
253.
All right, so 253 per person. How many people do you think additionally would need these kinds of licenses? How many ROAs do you think would need to have the license for this?
So if the plan would be to have each departmental RAO do their own redactions and their own publishing of the request, then each RAO would need to have an Adobe license. I don't know if you'd want to have multiple in a department which has multiple RAOs. Some of the larger departments have multiple people who handle this.
I
If you
mean,
have just
this
one.
is your team. So if you were asked to implement this tomorrow, I'm asking how many people would you want to have an Adobe Acrobat license?
Yeah, that would be one. I think it's fair to say one per department. There might be a department where it makes sense to have a second person have it, but I think if you're looking for kind of a quick ballpark estimate, I would do one per department. So let me just quickly get a count for you of how many of those RAOs there are.
Mm-hmm.
And Margaret, while Ben's doing that, I'm afraid you might be adding costs for the petitioner's proposed amendment, but mixing in costs from the actual warrant article.
Oh, please correct me.
So the kind of 100
to.
hours is for their proposed amendment. If we're actually doing the cost of the warrant article as proposed, we don't have the certainty of all this information.
Okay. I think, well, let me ask the petitioners. Do you plan to amend the warrant article? Because if so, I'll do my analysis based on the amendment.
So I think it depends on the answers to a few questions that we haven't received the answers
Okay.
to yet.
And that's
So,
fair.
so Margaret, it's a great question. So I agree with town council that the direction you were heading was sort of the full picture.
Yeah, I was
right?
going
Because,
to the whole hog.
yeah,
And then
so
we can
there's
compare
the
from there.
right. So there's the request portion, and then there's separately the response portion. And all this Adobe Acrobat stuff was, I think, regarding the response portion, which I want to put on hold for the moment, given the complexity of that we're hearing tonight, and the costs that are being shared tonight. And I want to go back to that first part of just the request side. So if we were to limit the scope of this just to the request side, Cliff has asked, and now I have asked, and we still haven't seen a screenshot, for example, of what actually is the information on the request side that is being cataloged under current practice. And so it's hard for me to understand exactly what we're asking for. There was a great question in the chat by saying, like, could we amend the article to exclude personal data or data or otherwise we need to be redacted by staff? And the answer is quite possibly. Quite possibly, we could ask for the version of that you're mentioning Brookline News asked for, which included some variables, but excluded others. But I don't know yet what those variables are because Ben hasn't spelled them out. So we actually need to have a list to know whether we can go that route, and that would satisfy the intent of the petitioners, at least on the request side. So I'm going to pause here. Great question, Margaret. I don't know what we're asking because we haven't got enough information yet to be able to craft our ask.
Okay.
Can I just quickly address just one of those pieces? So I want to make sure it's not lost in the shuffle. The redaction piece is exclusive, more or less. That's a bigger issue on the providing the full, sorry, not the redaction list. The ADA piece is a bigger issue for the response documents. However, the Adobe accounts would still be required even if it's just for redacting information, because many requests come in with the request itself as a PDF that's attached to the submitted request. And that would need to be made accessible if it's being posted on the website. So you'd still need that Adobe license for the RAO so that they could do the redactions on the request document.
Okay, so we are now amending the comment that Adobe licenses are only for the response side, and we are now asserting that Adobe licenses are also on the request side.
Correct.
Okay.
And
So I have
And-
some numbers for you.
Oh,
Great.
thank you.
Get it off my to-do list this evening instead of tomorrow.
Thanks.
So without including Chaz's salary, the average hourly rate for Brookline department heads for fiscal 27 would be $82.35 an hour, with an additional $16.35 for benefits, just for health insurance, not for anything else. So that makes a combined rate of $98.69 per hour, weighted with health insurance. Doesn't include life insurance or any other benefits that might be in some of the contracted positions.
Round it to 100.
Yeah.
There you go.
Way,
So-
way ahead of you, Cliff.
May I ask a question, Cliff? Are you still there?
Yes, you may.
Oh, you turned your camera off, I think, which is fine. Just
No,
wanna make sure
I
you-
did. I did.
Okay, good. So I would like, so Ms. Braga, you are the HR director, right? I think that's
Correct.
right. And so do you get involved in sort of task allocation? Like which tasks should be done by which seniority of people kind of thing?
I let my department heads or our department heads choose their pick their poison, so to speak. They assign the appropriate staff to do what's needed to be done. My office has 6 people in it, so not a lot of choices. And some of the information is at such a level, if it's somebody's personnel file or something like that, we're not having an admin staff or an intern or anybody like that doing those kinds of requests. It really is looking at the content expert and who can get through it faster.
So
Sometimes I do it. Sometimes Leslie does it. Leslie in my office, who is our assistant HR director,
So-
is our RAO on the for FOIA Direct. But there are some things that I deal with and some things that she does.
Sure. So the question behind the question was with regard to redaction, which I think generally means strike out email addresses, phone numbers, etc. Fairly well
On the
prescribed.
requests, yes, but
On the
on the
request.
content,
Yep.
on the content itself, it would be
I'm
more.
limiting my question to the request.
Sure.
So it seems to me the redaction criteria of PII and so on is quite straightforward in my estimation, and therefore should hardly be the job of our most precious employees in terms of their cost and time at the department head level. Is this not something that could be pushed down the chain in terms of PII redactions?
So if it's done through the system, so not every single employee has access to FOIA Direct to respond. Our record access officer does. If the redaction is, to Ben's point around the content of the request itself, having to redact that, not going into what the actual responsive documents are. Not everybody has access to that. So saying that, taking out PII or just taking out, we'll say one of the 3 factors, right? If 2 of the 3 are there, is taking out one of them. You have to have access to the system to be able to do that. And so that can be a challenge if you want to have a clerical staff do that. They would have to have access to the system in addition to whoever, in the case of my office, our HR coordinators are sort of our strictly admin person, and then Leslie is our RAO as the number 2 in the department. Then both of them would have to have access to be able to deal with Leslie at a responsive document
with the admin person having it, because according to these calculations, we spent $1.4 million on having department heads do this kind of work last year. So my read is that, listen, and I understand this is operational complexity, but if we even were to half that cost, we'll be adding a benefit to the town, adding transparency to the town, and reducing cost. 1.4 million on this is crazy. Like, that's a lot of money, right? So like, is there a way for us to kind of have our cake and eat it too? Like, that's what I'm kind of wondering here is like, I'm not trying to spend like more money on something, but I see an opportunity for some operational efficiency to kind of get something people are asking for, and also like better manage our precious resources, which is like our human capital. And so that's like what I'm kind of asking this team to think a little bit about is like, is it possible at all to do those things and not spend 1.4 million on what we did last year?
I would say
I'm sorry.
the number.
Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, why
I was
don't
going
you
to say the
keep that-
$1.4 million is the response to the question that I was asked. I don't know that's an accurate estimate, and I would hate
well,
to see that sort of go larger.
Well, it's the estimate that came from our
Margaret,
town council. Yes.
Margaret, please. So there are
Okay.
other people who have points to make, so let's try to raise hands.
Oh,
Okay?
sorry. I didn't know I was hogging the time. I've been so quiet.
Okay. I have a question about this particular topic, Mike. So I don't know if there's any particular liability here. That's a question for town council. But if I'm a department head and information needs to be redacted, and it's in my department, I don't care who does it, I'm going to look at it. If I'm not going to do it, I'm going to be making sure that work is done. Because if there's any potential liability associated with this, or any potential fallout for doing something incorrectly, I'm not going to run that risk. So you're going to have two different people. You're going to have double costs in that sort of circumstance. So I just don't think it's as easy as giving it to an admin and say, get rid of this information without having a checks and balances in the system.
Well, I'm not designing the process. I just asked Ms. Braga whether the folks at a lower level will be capable of deleting PII. I'm not, I mean, at some point, we trust our staff to figure out task allocation. But the numbers that have been thrown around tonight seem somewhat extraordinary to me. Including that it would take 10 times more effort to do it with 133 hours versus 12. I understand there's this idea of switching costs and startup, but 10x is profound. And I might, talk to Alec about if there's a middle ground here, if we could do some batching and say, let's do this monthly instead of every single time, then can we get closer to the 10-hour or the 12-hour total? And probably you'd batch it across person, right? Like Ben did it for all departments, if I understand it correctly, in 12 hours for an entire year. So if we asked whether Ben or one other person who can search and replace quarterly or monthly, let's just say monthly, 12 times, you have a routine, you look for the certain, I don't know how you do it, but he did 12 hours. I just wonder if there's other ways where we can look for some compromise where we still get the information out there and we keep costs and effort at a reasonable level. So I'm looking for solutions to sort of achieve our general objectives without throwing very high numbers at this problem that a little bit strain credulity.
Ben, do you have a response to that?
Only to note that the information that's being redacted is not only personal identifying information. That's redacted from all of them. The many requests have much more complex things in the request itself that need to be redacted, whether they're pertaining to personnel issues or other sensitive documents or sensitive materials. So I would just caution against looking at this simply as you're deleting emails. I think that's a part of it, but there's also a lot of other redaction that does take certain level of knowledge, understanding, and expertise in order to do.
Elise?
Yeah, I guess I'm just struggling to reconcile a few things. One is it's clear that other towns and municipalities have found ways to be transparent with their residents. On the other hand, I totally understand there needing to be some protections behind personal information and certainly information that might have some legal restrictions or restraints. But those reasons should not be the end all be all for why we can't have transparency. And that's what I'm having difficulty reconciling here. I mean, as someone who works, at least in the museum and cultural space, in development and funding, I am privy to a lot of private information. And there are ways that that is regulated, documented, and in some cases, if we need to black it out, we do. Redact it, we do. But this isn't a complicated thing. So I'm having a hard time understanding what the complexities are here specific to Brookline.
Can I try to answer that? Joe
Sure.
Callany, Town Council.
Yep.
I am a believer in transparency in government, and since I've been town council for the past 4 years, I've tried to have us comply with the public records law, to a greater extent. And I've confronted all sectors of town, both staff, residents, town meeting members. Many of you see an email each month, the first of the month, reminding town meeting members I disagreed with the Town Meeting Members Association, saying that their emails were public records. So there's been articles written about me and complaining about our response in the Globe. But again, I think I can point to other articles where I've been lauded for my public records response, both by Sam Mintz and also Coleman Herman, who, if you know, is a gadfly reporter. So I think we do a very good job here. Okay. And what I've heard is, but you don't do what Newton does, and you don't do what Framingham does. Okay. Don't know that is true, but I'll concede it for the moment. But I do know that means we do better than Athol, Agawam, Ashburnham, and every other town other than 348. So if we're not doing as well as Newton and Framingham, and we're number 3rd of 351, that puts us in the 99th percentile. And if you want us to do better, I'm always striving to do better, but you're at that point of diminishing marginal returns. And if you want us to do better, we'd need more money, because I wouldn't be surprised if we spend $1 million of taxpayer money on responding to public records requests. We spend an extraordinary amount of time responding to public records requests. And you know what? We don't actually comply with the law. So if I had 10 more hours, 100 more hours of staff time devoted to responding to public records requests, I would love it. But I wouldn't have it be spent on posting this information on the website, which Ben has demonstrated I've been here 4 years, and he's been here longer. Out of the hundreds of public records requests we've got, that's happened twice. So I'd rather have those, whatever number of hours you guys feel comfortable devoted to this task, if it's 10 or 100, I'd have it be devoted to us responding more timely. That's a known complaint. That's a known area. That's something that people complain about, as you saw in the town meeting members listserv. So I don't know what the number is that you feel comfortable saying we should spend more time on this, but that would take us from 99th percentile to 99 and 44th percentile. Okay. But we should be spending that time on other things. This isn't the critical unmet need the town is facing. It's not even the critical unmet need in regards to public records law responses. So I would say if it's 1 hour more, we shouldn't be doing this. If it costs $1 more, we shouldn't be doing this. Because if we have an extra dollar for public records area, I could define better ways to spend it. If we had more time responding to public records requests, I'd say spend it on making sure we respond timely, not on this.
Oh, Eli. Cliff, I read your mouth, you're silenced, but I think you said my name. You're muted, but I
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
vested interest in reading your lips correctly. So I think, it's useful to hear staff's perspective on this, but ultimately this is a question for town meeting. Like, town meeting will decide whether we want the incremental effort to be spent with Brookline joining the other communities that post this information publicly, or whether they would rather not do that. And I don't see this as a ranking of 99th percent, or I think it's like binary, like we're either providing information to the public about public records, or we're not. And at the moment, we're not. Other communities are publishing both the requests and the responses. We're trying to figure out whether maybe we meet halfway. And so we join the second tier of transparency, not be on the top tier of requests and responses. But even that doesn't seem to be getting any more reception from staff to meet halfway. And so we'll have to figure out, sort of Alec and I, in terms of as the petitioners, what we'll go forward with asking town meeting to deliberate. And of course, AC can have its own motion if it prefers.
Elise?
Yeah, Mike, you make a really good point, and I hear what Joe and Ben and staff have been saying. You know, I understand deeply and very personally the constraints. I mean, working in museums, we don't have time, we don't have enough to allocate for anything. So I understand the restrictions we have here, but I also see this from a political standpoint, which is if we're bringing this warrant article in a year that we're going to have an override on the ballot, how can we pass something which I think is important about transparency and governance? How can we reasonably pass something at a time when we are so confined otherwise and restricted otherwise in terms of our finances? So what can we do on the AC and in this subcommittee to work with the petitioners to maybe negotiate some in between? Is that even a possibility?
So I'm gonna take that for the moment as a rhetorical question, okay, and let Margaret make her or ask her question, and then I guess I can't really phrase it as a question, so maybe I'll wait until after the hearing is done and make my comment. But please, Margaret.
I won't repeat what Elise said, but Joe and Ben especially, well, everyone, Anne included, and Jonathan, I appreciate your candor, and I also appreciate that you came prepared with numbers. You definitely did your research on who was going to be in this meeting. And I also appreciate that no one wants to be micromanaged by town meeting. It's not fun, especially when they're not going to give you more resources, but asking you to do more stuff. But to that point, I would just reaching out to say that, like, I would love to figure out how we could work something out here, so that it doesn't end up being a scenario where if it's not this year, next year, there's a resolution or a bylaw passed that really puts you in a tough spot and makes it harder for anybody to do their job. Because I don't think that's what the petitioners want. That's certainly not what I want.
I'm gonna thank you, Margaret. I'm gonna phrase, I can come up with a question. Okay. I think what is sort of lacking in the conversation this evening is the required detail in terms of numbers for everybody to sort of be able to be talking off the same page. And even, Mike, to your question about can we do it monthly or quarterly or annually, whatever it is, it all still requires a better estimate of the investment of time that would be required so that people can talk about this more intelligently than I think we're able to do right now. And, you know, I will, I'll hold my comment for later, but it will kind of riff off of what both Margaret and Elise have alluded to, and what our old BFAC friends would have said about this too. So we'll come back to that. If there are no other questions or comments from the public, I'm going to close the public hearing and open the public meeting, at which point we can sort of get into commentary and suggestions. So if there's no objection, I'm going to do that. Okay, so the public hearing is closed. The public meeting is now open. I'm going to use my prerogative and start. I am, look, the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee talked about the pressures that face the schools in the town. And one of the things that was mentioned was unfunded mandates from town meeting. And, I don't have it right in front of me, but I could easily pull up a list of unfunded mandates that have been passed the last few years. It's an extraordinarily lengthy list that was prepared by Melissa and Carla in response to a question from one of the select board members. And again, Mike, this is an issue that we discussed at BFAC. I view this as an unfunded mandate. And so typically at advisory, we would say, well, okay, where's the money coming from? What are you going to do to balance this? What are you going to suggest we cut? And by the way, that is in a year where the town is already cutting a significant number of people and not so much programs, but certainly there's less to go around. So that is a question. I do think there's a lot of analysis to do here that hasn't been done. You might say, well, geez, that's the responsibility of the advisory committee. Now that we've given you something to look at, I think it's more the responsibility of the petitioners to come with a fully baked idea that actually shows the numbers, because this does have an impact. It's either an explicit cost, an explicit cost, or an opportunity cost, or some variation of the three. And I'm reluctant to suggest anything until we get some more information beyond this is a really good idea. It's a really important idea that needs more work. And so I throw that out as something for you guys to consider.
Do you want responses, or do you want to go around with the committee first?
Well, that's a good idea. Why don't we go around and from Margaret and Elise, and then you guys can comment.
Sure, I'll go first. I'm in a similar spot. I would love to figure something out. I think we've already learned a lot just in this conversation around how we could make something work with the resources that we have available. And to your point, Cliff, I have also spoken to Dennis around unfunded mandates. I actually sent him a request to update our advisory committee template. I was told to kick rocks. So if you want to do a little prodding there on my behalf. And that's also why I was asking questions. I'm filling out my own template because darn it, I'm doing it myself. But yes, I like you. I don't want to. It's not great for town meeting to be passing things that you're not paying for. It's also not great to be a manager, be told to do something new and not be given new resources. So I would I don't know if it's vote to refer or vote to meet again, but my vote would be, I don't want to vote yes or no on this right now because I think we already want something that's not reflected in the writing. I'll pass it to Elise.
Yeah, so I actually agree with that. I feel like there was a lot of new information shared to both of the petitioners that maybe we could refer this back to the petitioners to come up with a thoughtful amendment that we could revisit with the new information that was shared tonight. Does that sound reasonable?
If there's time in this season, if there isn't, then I guess the question would be whether or not you'd want to postpone. And to that point, I don't think this is just something to put back on the petitioners. I think in order for any article like this that looks to have additional services from the town, even if they're totally warranted, it totally makes sense. I think there really needs to be good cooperation between, and a good faith effort between the petitioners and staff, Ben, Joe, and where there's the desire to work together to achieve something that we see other folks doing. And as good as we are, town meeting always wants to be better. I'm gonna make that statement without judging it. And it's in everyone's best interest if you project out where town meeting might go. It's in everyone's best interest to put forward something that there's a collective belief could work and be done in a way that would satisfy the town meeting, once something's in place. Because the worst thing to do is to have something pass and then for it not to work, and then for town meeting to try something else, because then you're just spinning wheels.
Well, I also think it's important that we are not blindly, town meeting is not blindly directing staff and micromanaging, as has been mentioned before, because we don't have expertise in this field. So I think there is something to be said about finding out exactly what it would cost, and having that written down so that we can vote one way or the other on this. I don't know if that means deferral or what, but smarter minds than mine can figure that out.
I guess I would leave that up to the petitioners to think about and give us some guidance on.
Well, I think what you're hearing from Alec and me are attempts to sort of figure out a path forward that adds transparency, even if not all of the things we were seeking, given the complexities of this new pending American Disabilities Act in particular, where that's like about to hit. And so I imagine if Joe and Ben are right, a bunch of other towns are about to, who are currently transparent, might realize a big budgetary hit if they have to do all the investment in software and efforts that they were describing we would have to invest in. So I think we're willing to sort of scale back the request, given that potentially multi-million-dollar figure that was emerging, to be like other towns, because maybe those other towns will have to invest more as well. That said, there's pieces of this that seem quite salvageable, and using Ben's own number of $12 hours, and using Ms. Braga's number of $100. I don't know if that was like partially loaded, not fully loaded, because she said it included healthcare but not other benefits. So it was something like $82 plus benefits. So I don't know what that number comes. Say I'm going to use 100 for just because I can do that math in my head. I say $100 and Ben took 12 hours. If we say, let's do it quarterly. Now, maybe quarterly, I was just going to suppose Ben would be half as productive because he'd have to incur the startup costs each time of doing the redactions that he did in 12 hours. Maybe it would take him 24 hours across the year. So something like 24 divided by 4 each quarter. At $100 an hour, that's $2,400. That seems to me a reasonable unfunded mandate, and I have no problem creating a budget amendment that adds $2,400 to the town clerk's budget, if that's the guidance we're getting from the AC subcommittee, to make this palatable. So it's not unfunded, it'll be funded. It's $2,400. So like you have to decide if that's rounding error or not, of course.
Well, you got to tell me where that money's coming from.
Sure.
Gotta figure out, identify where it's coming from, and then you got to make sure that Ben is okay and he believes that that estimate is reasonable. I guess what I was really suggesting is that there's been a lot of numbers thrown around tonight, and a lot of it is just sort of like off the cuff. And, you know, again, back to BFAC, it's sort of like we should do better than that.
Totally
We really
agree.
should. And so I guess what I would personally like to see would be an effort, a combined effort, to try to actually do something that we don't see done very often, and that is essentially cost something out and understand it in more detail. And if that means waiting 6 months for this, you know, I think that's a good exercise to do, because it's going to start showing people the type of analysis that can be done for something like this if people put their minds to it. Again, I think that requires the cooperation of, you know, the petitioners, staff, and folks from the AC, which I think, you know, I'd love to see happen.
But I'm sorry, at least I don't get that.
So is that a suggestion to refer until the fall?
It's referrals is really not probably the right term, at least as I think of it, but I guess it would be a suggestion to withdraw or plan on resubmitting
Well, these
an
numbers
article
don't seem
because
that difficult to get, right? Like, I don't think it'll take 6 months.
It's two
well,
numbers.
it might
people.
not, it might
Right.
not, but it's probably not going to happen maybe if you have the
That's what we were
time.
told. What are you talking about? Maybe.
I'm
That's
sorry?
literally what we were told.
Told what?
We were given hours and we were given an hourly rate. Why? This is not hard.
You were what? Because from my perspective, you were given information that was like off the top of the head.
Or
right.
why don't we check that assumption and ask the people who gave us those numbers whether those are off the top of their head or those are decent numbers? I understood them to be like actual factual numbers. Anne looked up some numbers and she said, here's the number. Ben told us
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
he spent 12 hours doing it. Those are facts. Those are not speculation.
All right, Mike, from my own perspective, it's inadequate.
What
It's an
would you like
inadequate-
to see to make it adequate, Cliff? Because we're proceeding. We're not going to wait 6 months. We're going to proceed
All right,
in some manner.
Mike, you can go ahead however you want. All right?
Okay, I'm just telling you that.
Okay, so from my own perspective, what I would have liked to have seen, I would have liked to have seen the petitioners do this work ahead of time.
We didn't get the
Okay.
numbers, Cliff. We
I'm
asked. We
sorry.
don't have
Well,
them. We asked.
that's
Cliff,
an
we can't
excuse.
invent-
That's an
Then
excuse.
if we given you numbers that we made up because we didn't get them from staff until tonight, one could reasonably critique us as making up the numbers because we would have had to make up the numbers. So given we didn't have the numbers, we now have the numbers. Fine. We have plenty of time before town meeting. We're going to use the numbers we got unless we receive an email from Ann or Ben in 24 hours saying, actually, that's not a good number. We'll give you a better number. But I feel like they came with numbers. And we're just going to proceed in that
You know,
direction.
That's fine, Mike. You can absolutely do that. That's absolutely, you're right. I personally don't believe that people came with numbers for you to take them as an analysis that they want to stand behind for you to go in front of town meeting. I really
Isn't that
don't.
what- That's what AC subcommittees are for.
Well, and
So wait a second, Mike, you go back and you do your work, okay? You know, this is, it's sort of like, this is not what I've heard from you in the past. Let me just put it that way. Okay? But you guys do what you want. I'm not going to.
well,
I trust the staff numbers that were provided to us as facts tonight.
and I think, Cliff, I'll just say that we're happy to work offline in the interim with staff, including the folks who've participated this evening, and my thanks to all of them for taking the time and offering their expertise. As Mike said, I think we're very comfortable compromising on this, as long as we can, advance, I think, the intent and the spirit of the article in whatever way is most cost effective and most preserving of our limited resources. I think we're game for that. And I think what we've heard tonight gives us absolutely what we need to produce what I think will be a compelling estimate, and we're happy to come back with that. And of
And you can
course,
make,
get that.
you can make it you can make it revenue neutral. Somehow.
Well,
You're
to Mike,
you're gonna identify where you're gonna take money from to fund this. That's what you're gonna do, right, Mike?
I would be happy to bring a budget amendment for $2,400 for the consideration of town meeting, if that's the direction that AC is.
and
No,
and just
but
to note, that would come in
where
FY
and where
28.
that money's gonna come from. Say it's gonna come from the advisory committee pizza budget. I don't care, but identify it.
I will take that under advisement.
I will give up my pizza. I
I don't
happily
eat
offer
pizza
that.
That's really the point. You know, great to put in a budget amendment to add money, but it's gonna come from somewhere.
I know what a budget amendment is, Cliff.
Well, I know you do, but you weren't gonna go there, right?
I didn't say that. I said I'll make a budget amendment. So so it's useful to know for if this is now the posture of AC, if this is the direction that the AC chair has given the AC subcommittees, to basically say, no, we're not going to support any proposal that's not revenue neutral. Or is that just a particular proclivity of this subcommittee?
I think that's a proclivity of Mr. Brown.
Exactly.
So just
That's
to be
probably
clear,
why-
Cliff is speaking
Yeah.
for himself, and also to be clear, he's not the only
That's right.
member of the subcommittee who is
That's
voting
right.
on this.
That's correct. Which I've said.
Thank
Which
you.
I've
Just
said.
so
I've said my colleagues can do what they vote the way they want to. But from my own perspective, and particularly, you know, Mike, maybe it's because it's particularly you, you know, because of the history, this is exactly what AC should be doing. And so that's why I think it's something that you understand.
Can I speak after you, Cliff?
But sorry, Margaret, go ahead, please.
Just to clarify my position, I like to see things that are funded because I have seen warrant articles, even in my short time on town meeting, get passed. Nobody can tell you the cost. And then you end up with budgets that have 2 FTEs when no one could tell you 6 months before what something was going to cost. So like, that's how I feel is, and I also am sensitive to like giving people more work when they're saying it's going to like they don't have enough staff. So, but preaching to the choir, I feel like Mike and Alec, you hear us loud and clear, and I'm really excited to work with you offline and see what we can figure out. Because like you, I 100% see a path forward here.
Lise.
Yeah, so I certainly echo Margaret's sentiments there that she just stated, but I also just want to state for the record that I think in terms of requests for what costs might have been and town employees not being able to get numbers back until this evening, I just want it on the record that, our town staff is really restricted right now and overburdened with a lot of stuff, especially with the override. And I know you guys know this, but I just wanted on the record that this is not any sense of, I think, folks trying to come to the table with some sort of malintent. I think everybody is showing up here with positive intent, and we all want to figure out how best to move this forward. And I think we're negotiating that out now. And I really am glad to have had this candid of a conversation about this. So I'm really appreciative to everybody participating tonight. So thank you.
I totally agree, Elise, and I didn't at all mean to imply otherwise. I just said the reason we didn't bring numbers is because we just didn't have them in advance. But I'm quite comfortable receiving them tonight as we did. So thank you for making that point, and I wanted to be able to respond to clarify if I was misinterpreted. I really am appreciative of the folks joining us tonight.
Margaret, when are these articles going to be presented?
Let me check. Give me a second.
The
I have it in my phone, but let me look it up. For some reason, okay, hold on. Before I even say that,
I don't think
everyone
anyone
talk
told
amongst
us.
yourselves.
I don't think anyone told Alex and me any formal AC date. So if there is a date,
Alec probably knows it off the top of his head because he's hold on a second.
Not the
There's a,
top of my head, but I can get it.
Yeah, I thought there was a new schedule just
We
released.
do. That's like what I'm.
Yeah, Lisa had sent
just
it out
it 4
on the
days ago.
26th.
These are 12 and 23.
Let me see.
12 and 24. 24 is April 14th. Well, that's not really about this one.
12 is April 23rd, which I think,
Okay.
speaking for myself, I think is ample time for us to
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah, to amend our motion and to verify with the relevant town staff our cost assumptions to validate all those numbers.
So what we should do is to see if Dennis will and Harry will move this to both these to the same night. And maybe that night is the 23rd.
Okay.
I
And-
will also just note for the purpose of the subcommittee meeting that we've spent a lot of time talking about Article 12, but not really any time
Yeah.
talking about Article 24.
Okay.
Yeah, I would wonder if we can move forward with Article 24 tonight, if there's.
Oops. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Granted, I anticipate 24 will hopefully be a little more simple. It is a resolution, and it really is calling for broader adoption of what is already an encouraged voluntary practice among the majority of appointed board and commission positions.
And was,
Okay, so-
it was negotiated somewhat with IT Director Yang and Chaz.
Okay. So I've closed the public hearing, but since we really have no members of the public, I don't think who want to say anything. We'll just continue on in this meeting with anyone who wants to say anything, feel free. Anyone on the subcommittee, do you have any comments or thoughts about this one?
I do not, mostly because my main questions were towards IT Director Yang, and she actually had addressed them up front a few weeks ago in a live AC meeting. So I no longer have questions.
Elise, do you have anything?
No, not at this point.
Well, this is going to be the last point because we're probably going to put this one for a vote tonight. You say you've gone over this with Chaz?
Yeah, we had
As
a
written.
conversation with IT Director Yang on the call here and with Chaz. We were originally contemplating a bylaw that was going to ask for all folks doing town business to actually use Brookline MA email addresses.
Right.
So that we would have public records. And then Chaz and Fang indicated that that would be quite costly. And also suggested that there was this alternative way that if we can get people to actually do the CCing of a public archives address when they're conducting town business, that would be a free alternative. And we like free. And it would still provide access to the IT department to be able to reach in to get copies of correspondence that are public records. It already was recommended, as Alec mentioned, as a recommended practice in the select board handbook for select board appointed committees. Chaz and agreed to make that a requirement in the next edition, which is forthcoming. And so that would cover that practice. Basically, we're endorsing that practice. And then we're also seeking to expand it. There's nothing particularly unique about select board appointed. It should also apply to moderator appointed committees like CTONS and the AC, for example, and moderator committees. So for town business, simply CCing this Brookline MA email address will make it much easier for the town to access public records and be able to respond to public records requests. There's a training issue. We're doing this, we hope, with good faith that training will be conducted and that people's behavior will be exhibited. And we did make one edit based on Marissa Vogt, who's here today. And so we can show you, whenever you're ready, we can show you our amended language that reflects her suggestion. Yep, she's there.
Please do. Let me let you share the screen, okay?
Okay. Did you want to take other comments, or you want me to show that right now?
Well, why don't you share it, and then we'll see if Elise and Marissa still want to say anything.
Okay. Give me 1 sec here. Find my share button. Okay, so this is the full text. Can you see it across the two screens, the 2 pages that I'm showing?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I can.
So here we are. Thanks to Marissa for suggesting to Alec and me that we add some language. I'd love to hear from Marissa to make sure that this actually matches what she saw. We tried to match what she asked. She's giving a thumbs up. So town meeting encourages the select board to view the addition of continued or intentional non-compliance with this rule to be grounds for the select board to deny reappointment or ask a member to step up. Alec checked with the moderator, who ruled this edit to be within scope. That's the only edit, right? Right, Alec? That's the only edit?
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Okay, so I can stop sharing whenever you want me to, or?
Sure. Marissa?
Yeah, well, I'll just start by saying, yeah, that's perfect, Mike and Alec, and thank you for taking that suggestion. One of the reasons why I made that suggestion was because so I use a Gmail address I created separately from my personal email address for all of my town meeting related business, and so it's a little hard to tell sometimes, like, even so when I get an email there, if it's because of my my role with, like, Safe Routes to School, whether it's because of, like, town meeting or library trustees. And I think some of those emails would not necessarily need to be forwarded to the board archives, and some do, and I think there's a little bit of confusion there, and I would not want anyone who doesn't forward their emails because of that confusion to be penalized. But I personally find it very annoying to have to, like, forward messages that I receive. Especially because I think, like, I've created this email address specifically for that use, of, like, keeping all of my town and personal things separate. And it's just very frustrating to me that we can't find a better solution than relying on people to kind of opt in to forward messages that they receive. It's one thing to, like, to compose a message and to add that to your outgoing messages when you're creating when you're composing, but for messages that I receive to have to then click the forward button, I think is a little it's just annoying. But I do wonder why, and like, I've never gotten an answer. Maybe you did, Alec and Mike, but why we can't, like, as a somewhat medium ground, like middle ground, like, why we can't have, like, a mailing list for each board within that, like, the town creates, or even, like, an email address for each board chair, that, like, so every time someone emails a board, like, I email the transportation board chair, and, like, or the transportation board, and all of those archives are, like, that email address auto forwards, and so then, like, there's no need for other auto forwarding. I don't understand why they can't rely more on email lists rather than creating individual email accounts. That was kind of my question.
I did just want to briefly, in response to that, note that in the text of the resolution, Article 24, the only person who is required, should the text be
No.
adhered to,
Okay, so
to
it's their fault.
CC the archive and preserve the public record is the person generating the public record. So just to be clear, we're not expecting that there's any requirement for someone who receives a public record
Yeah,
email to then have to, be incumbent on them to forward it to the archive. The person generating the record is who would be required under what we anticipate the new policy that's adopted by the select board. That's who would be required to do that.
I think that's a difference between your policy and what the select board policy is right now, though. That, or am I misremembering the select board policy?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, well, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I've been forwarding messages that I didn't have to.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it, Maud.
To your question, Marissa, about relying more heavily on
Hold on.
Brookline Matt email addresses. I mean, again, that's where we started, and we just retreated based on the costs, which were surprisingly to me substantial, as quoted by Feng. So who's here today? If you have questions about these, those would be better directed to her than to the petitioners, because that's where we started.
And also to your point,
Even
Marissa,
for like
some
list?
boards and commissions do operate that way. I'll note, for instance, the planning board lists their staff contact on their webpage, and so public communication with the planning board typically flows through their staffer.
And I need to
The
find-
same is often true for advisory committee, where we have a
Okay. Thank you.
So why do you need it?
Alec, I can't.
oh, sorry, did I get
There you
You
go.
got
Yeah,
muted
you're
there
back.
for a sec.
You're back. You're back.
yeah, so I was just going to say, so for advisory, for instance, oftentimes when we receive public information, that's also channeled through our committee clerk. So it is a practice that's been utilized at times. As to why it's not more widely utilized, my suspicion, based on the examples I'm aware of, is that it's only really utilized in instances where a board or commission has a dedicated staffer.
So are we getting close to a vote, Cliff, Chair, so we can move on?
Does anyone else have anything to say? Okay, so I'm going to move favorable action on Article 24 as amended. I'll take a second.
I'll second.
Okay. Elise,
Yes.
Margaret,
Yes.
Chair abstains.
And for the record, I'm abstaining as well.
That motion passes.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay, and so we will hopefully reconvene at a future time. I'm going to schedule it for April 23rd, like at 6 o'clock, just prior to the AC meeting. If things get resolved sooner, let me know, and we'll try to get something on the docket sooner so that we can actually incorporate something into the write-up.
So I can't, I'm afraid you can proceed that way. I can't attend either of those April 23rd dates. No one notified me that that's when our article was for consideration at full AC. Usually they ask the petitioners about their availability, but this one, it looks like it skipped a beat there. So I'm going to
I will
hope
say
to.
I am available.
Yeah.
So assuming we're able to get, the work we need to do done in the interim, I should have no problem representing. the
Okay,
petitioners.
great. That's fine.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, we are now, yes, Margaret.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know you were in a few. I have an ops question for you, which was, what am I doing about 12? I don't have anything to write up, so I assume that I'll check in with the petitioners, and then check back in with you with whatever information, like however they amend it, and then I write my report.
So you can do it that way. What I would probably do if I were in your shoes, and you can, reject this approach, is I would probably write as much as I could based upon this evening's discussion, because there was a lot of discussion, and sort of like note at the end of whatever I was doing that there was an expectation that the subcommittee would reconvene prior to presentation to the full committee to see whether or not, well, frankly, we have to reconvene one way or another, to see whether or not there was any mutually agreeable compromise that was able to be crafted. And if so, it would be presented on the 23rd, right? Assuming that we don't get anything until that date. And you could certainly outline all the pluses and the minuses, the arguments, and why we didn't vote. And then we sort of play it by ear on the 23rd.
Cool, thanks.
So just
And
can I just ask a quick question there? Mutually agreeable compromise between whom? Like, we're going to come back with a proposal. So I'm not sure whether it will be mutually agreeable. I'm not
Fair
sure
enough.
that that's actually what you meant to
Yeah.
say.
That's fine. You're right. You're
Okay.
right. Whatever it is going to be agreeable to you, and that's what's important. Because if you don't come to something that everyone likes, then you're going to move forward with your thing anyway, and that's fine. In which case, we'll still meet prior to the
Sure.
meeting and take a vote. Sure.
And we'll be sure to provide timely updates on that progress to Margaret and yourself, Cliff. So we'll just make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, it would be my preference to actually have this meeting sooner than April 23rd so that Margaret can actually write it up properly and inform AC properly with notice about what we're actually amending, what we're actually proposing, because it'll be different from the warrant article and people might want to chew on that a little bit. It usually does not work well when AC has zero notice and then is being asked to vote on something that's quite a bit different from the warrant article. So my preference would be to actually convene sooner than April 23rd. We certainly, on Alec and my side, I think we can progress quite quickly on this as soon as, I'll speak for Alec for a second, perhaps next week or the week after, for sure.
Understood. And I would just, on behalf of certainly the AC, and I assume the petitioners would ask, Ben, Joe, Fong, and whoever you might reach out to, I know it's a crazy time for all of us, but if there's a way to move this along to a point that something is put in front of town meeting that you would actually find more acceptable or acceptable, your help is obviously needed to accomplish that.
Great, thanks, guys.
Okay, we are opening up a public meeting, a continuation. We're not opening up, we're continuing the meeting on warrant article 23 that we started a couple of weeks ago. And I guess we were in the discussion phase. I do have some questions that I never got around to asking that I probably would like to ask, but before we get there, thanks, Ben, appreciate it. Alec, do you have anything you want to provide us with?
Just very briefly, I think the central question that arose at the end of the last meeting was whether or not and to what degree increasing the stipend amounts for select board members and adding stipends for school committee members would necessitate additional expenses for the town, specifically either retirement benefits or health insurance. What we were told by Director Braga this week was that there would be a triggered requirement for pension obligations for these stipends, but there would not be a requirement for health coverage, if I understood her response correctly. I think it'd probably be more helpful to hear directly from Ann on this than myself trying to relay her thoughts. So I'd be happy to turn it over to Ann.
Thank you, Alec. So in consultation with the retirement board director, anything over $5,000 or more, so $5,000 or more triggers a pension obligation. There is a specific provision in the bylaw that prohibits, in this case, select board members from receiving health insurance. And I would guess, I won't assume, but I'll guess that we would not be providing health insurance for school committee members when we don't provide it for select board members. Then I was asked further a question regarding reimbursement for childcare. We do not reimburse anyone for childcare, any employee, any committee member for childcare. Those who are employees have the opportunity to use the selection under flexible spending for dependent care expenses. And for the next fiscal year, dependent care expenses, at least for town employees, is going from $5,000 a year to $7,500 a year. So if any of you who are not in the know on that, that is something that is a change in the federal level. That does mean it comes out of your paycheck, but it does come out pre-tax. And you do your paperwork and all the things. That's the information I have on both pension and health insurance.
And can I ask Ann just to get a sense of maybe what the additional cost for the pension obligation might be for the stipend amount? I think is it 30,000 for the select board at full maturity, and is it 25 for the school committee, or 22 or 20 even? Is that what you're saying, Marissa? Oh, sorry. 20. So for a $30,000 annual salary, essentially, and a $20,000 annual salary, do we know what the pension contribution would need to be for that salary level on a year-to-year basis?
No, we don't. So we would have ongoing payments that would come out of the operating budget, and it would have to be funded somewhere. And then if someone would have to vest, so that's 10 years of time, and based on age, and they could have military service. There's a whole bunch of like ands or depending on what the issue is. So I can't give you a defined pension obligation based on that. I will say that those folks that are looking to do that, it's you need that 10 years of service, and it does have that, and you guys are dealing with the math on the budget impact for that, which is around $360,000, I think, all in for everybody. That does trigger obviously town tax obligations under FICA and Medicare, if it were to be considered something other than a stipend. So you do have those higher obligations on the town where it's matching employee to employer. So
but you're saying we wouldn't have to pay those costs as long as they were considered stipends, yes?
So where it is now for select board to have 4,500 and then 3,500 for the members, they contribute to ERISA, which is required of everyone through VOIA, which is our non-pension positions. And so that part is taken out that way. But then the regular taxes, so FICA and Medicare, I think that's it. Is at that $5,000 rate or the $4,500 rate. So there would be other obligations of the town based based on a higher amount of
So we would
compensation.
then be paying payroll tax, which we're not currently paying, federal payroll tax.
We're paying less.
Or paying less. Okay. So there'd be an increase in the federal payroll tax contribution commensurate with the increase in the stipend. There would be the local pension obligation itself, which we'd need to fund, even though a member wouldn't be vested until 10 years of service. We'd still need to make those contributions to prepare as if they would vest.
Right. So in the first 9 years and 11 months, right? If you retire without having any other service, whether through another municipality or anywhere else, you would only get back what you've put in. So say, for example, over the 10 years, you put in, we'll say $50,000. Once you've been paid out $50,000, that cash out, then the obligation is done. But you can't assume that as you're going forward. So
you have to fund with the assumption that they'll vest. I understand that.
And basically, if we're looking at, having fully funded pension by 2030, then, we're adding to that short-term obligation, and then potentially, as people hit 10 years or more of service, or they're combining, and they decide to retire from Brookline, they're going to get that.
Okay. And just one last quick clarifying question on something in your answer there. If an individual did not make 10 years and didn't vest, is the payment schedule to return what they've put in the same as if they were just receiving a pension, or is it a lump sum payment?
It would be a lump sum payment when they decide to take it. So
I see.
For example, if I didn't have what'll be 30 years of service in May, and I only had 9 years and 11 months, when I leave, the money stays there until I make an affirmative action with PERAC to withdraw the money from sort of the retirement bank account. It's not that I get more money, from the town's contribution because I haven't vested. I would get that money back. And it would be a payout usually into a qualified retirement account, unless I'm, looking to need the money right away. And then you pay the tax penalty for not rolling it over into a qualified retirement account. So.
Got it. Thank you so much. And I saw some clapping, and I think it's worth saying, congratulations on 30 years of service and thank you. But I see the petitioners have their hand up, so I'm good. Thank you.
Marissa?
No, Alec, those questions were really great. I'm happy to, if you have more questions. But
No, I think that covered what I wanted to initially understand. So thank you so much, Anna.
yeah. So I have similar questions, like so when we hire somebody, like let's say I want to create a new, I want to pay the members of Wood and Bark, and I want to pay them. And do we know like how much that, like the pension part of their like, we have their salary, we have their benefits, and like, do we know exactly how much the pension part costs in the whole cost of like hiring that new FTE to the town is?
No, because you don't have the you don't incur the pension obligation, the town, to pay it out until the person retires.
Okay.
So in that 9 years and 11 months, there is no town pension obligation, aside from making sure that the money that's put aside stays in the sort of your pension bank account, so it doesn't go somewhere and get lost. It doesn't really happen at the state level of government so much, but maybe in DC, where they take money from one place to another. But so where that comes into play is you have an expected obligation at that 10 years, where you have to start having that additional amount. The employee is on the hook for the first, like I said, 9 years and 11 months. But it is something that is future forecasted. So if I started, we're hiring a couple of positions in HR to fill people who are leaving, and I hire a new person who has no state or municipal service. They're going to start at month 1, and that the town's pension obligation for that individual hits at 10 years if there's no other service. When I came in from Boston, I came in and I filled out a form with retirement that said I had 21 years in or 22 years in. And they know that separate account with Boston is sitting there. That's where my contributions are still in the Boston sort of account under my name.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Brookline. Brookline is putting money away in my Brookline and Braga account. And then when I go to retire, if I retire from Brookline, I'm going to go and fill out that paperwork. And the result is that of my total payment, I'm going to get some from the Boston bank account and some from the Brookline bank account as far as where the money was deposited. And then the overall obligation moves forward until, either I pass or depending on what option I choose as far as the last payment that would be made.
So if we hire Newton's previous wooden bark measurer, who's been doing that for 10 years exactly, and we hire them on day 1, do we know how much their pension is going to cost us?
We know what's in the Newton. We would know what was in the Newton bank account for that person. We don't know what Brookline's pension obligation is because we don't know how long that employee is going to work for us.
Okay. And then
that's why it's like
the pension,
3-dimensional math.
It depends on the salary, right?
Depends on the salary. It depends on the years of service, and it depends on the age in which someone retires. And the job that they had, because there are different groups. So public safety can retire earlier at a higher benefit level than myself or anybody else who's in as a public works person or a non-union person. Police and fire get different, they have a different grid. That number is there. And in their case, you also don't know if they're going to retire on a disability retirement, which increases the town's obligation. Those aren't
one last question.
Figured out.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is this mandatory? Like if I'm not hired for wooden bark, but if I'm elected to the select board this year, I'm not running. So I'm elected to the select board this year and I'm going to get a stipend. We don't have stipends now, but I'm going to get a stipend. Can I say I don't want a stipend, or can I say I don't want that I don't want that pension? Like I would just want my stipend and I don't want a pension because I'm a millennial. I wasn't ever expecting a pension anyway.
So under ERISA, which was filed under Ronald Reagan, everyone has to pay in towards their retirement income. And that was in response to making sure that in particular women or lesser breadwinners in married relationships didn't end up with nothing. And so everybody contributes. So I had to explain to my 14-year-old that he was contributing to a retirement account at 14. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yes, everybody. And folks who are retirees who decide to go work for McDonald's and just go, serve coffee to the seniors, at McDonald's, they pay into retirement accounts, even though they're collecting retirement or a pension from somewhere else. So
that's
it
different than
the
town pension obligation.
It is, but the principle is the same, regardless of whether you get a job, public or private. You are contributing towards your retirement income, and it's required.
Okay, so
it
even
goes
if
into a different bank account, it goes into
Marissa, let's can we move on? Elise, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I think Anne actually ended up answering it through Marissa's questions, which is mine is a much smaller scale than what Anne was proposing, but I had a museum job that was half the city of Newton and then half private. And so I still get these pension mailings that say 10 cents have been added to your retirement fund that I was not allowed to opt out of. And so what Anne is saying, makes sense. What I don't fully comprehend is that if, let's say, we vote on this and this goes to town meeting and town meeting says, okay, we're going to start paying the select board and the school committee. So at what point or threshold do we, or is there one where we're not paying, I guess, their retirement? Does that make sense? So I think we don't get a choice in
$999.
900. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
$1 under 5,000.
Yeah.
Now, Joe can answer the question on whether town meeting can put into the bylaws something that has a school committee stipend. Because I believe that's a school committee decision, but I leave that to somebody other than me.
So how would that work actually, considering how our budgets are set up separate between town and school? So if we were to try to provide these stipends, how and where would this money be coming from?
That I don't know.
So-
And my understanding is that both this and the previous items were both resolutions and not actual bylaws. They were sort of the intents of the proponents, but I can't answer the budget question.
So right now, and our pension costs are part of the benefits package, right? They're above the line, right?
They are, oof, I'm trying to remember. Pension is one number for both town and school. And I get confused as to what the definition of above and below the line is. And for the number of hours I've been on ERSC, I should know that by now, but it's escaping me right now.
Okay.
But it's a required it's required funding, and MTRS is the teachers' retirement system, but the other folks who are not teachers are part of, I believe, part of the BRB, or the Brookline retirement system. That would probably be a Lincoln Heineman question, potentially.
Okay. Thank you. I have a couple of questions going back to the last meeting. I'm sorry to go back over ground that people think may have been covered, but there were a few comments made and some information shared that I've spent some time thinking about, and I'd like to understand it better. So one comment was that the school committee does not have many folks on it, or hasn't had many folks on it, who actually have children in the public schools. I think, Tal, you made that comment last time. And related to that, there was some discussion about how a lot of the folks who are elected in town are folks who are retired, have time on their hands, can, afford to be there when others can't. And, so I focused really on the school committee because I was kind of surprised at the comment. I want to make sure that I got it correctly, that the comment was made that there weren't a lot of folks that had kids. Did I remember that correctly?
So I'm going to try and think through them right now. There is Sarah and Carolyn that have high school kids. Jesse has grandchildren. Suzanne is retired. Val and Andy both have kids who are now older. Mariah is the exception, having a much younger kid. She joined when the kid was still in preschool, and she is burnt out and she is basically left because she wants to spend more time with her child. And this has taken up too much time. Bob is retired. Who am I leaving out?
So I went back to like 2017 and, looked at all the different school committee members who had been served since then. And I'm going to share my screen for a second. So this is what I found, right? And I want to just describe my color coordination here, if everyone can see this. Green means someone has kids in the public schools of Brookline when they were serving. Gray means that they also were working when they were serving on the school committee. The yellows are people who did not have kids, to my best knowledge. It's interesting, the exception, sort of like David down here, was about to have his first kid. Not he, but he's, about to have his family. And he's been an elected official for quite some time. And it struck me that these folks were the vast majority of the folks who've been serving on school committee have children throughout the grades.
So
let me finish. Okay.
sorry.
So combination parents working with kids in the public schools through various different ages, certainly looking at when they started, where they are right now after being there for 3 years, 6 years, or however long, obviously becomes different. So I'm just pointing that out. The other question I had relates to this chart. And I want to ask the question whether or not you really feel that this is an apples to apples comparison.
Sorry, I'm still seeing the same screen.
Well, I'm sorry, you're right, because I didn't switch the document I was sharing. I'm sorry. My fault. Let me figure out how to change that. I think I need to stop sharing. Okay, and then reshare a different different document, which is this. Okay, here we go. So I want to ask whether or not you think this is truly an apples to apples comparison, Brookline with these other municipalities. Because I personally don't think it is. And the reason I don't is that Brookline's a town, these other cities, and you're including the mayor in the calculation. And the analog for us isn't just our select board members and chair. You have to add in our town administrator, who's not quite the mayor, but essentially, does things on a day-to-day basis that a mayor does. And when you include Chaz's compensation, which this year is probably about $246,000, that's what's in the budget. Our current number is over $4 per person based on your 21 population. And with the suggestions that you're making, would go up to about $6.75. essentially higher than every municipality except for Cambridge. And what I don't see here on this list are really our comparable communities. Wellesley's not there. Well, Lexington's here, but they've got nothing. Needham or Arlington or Winchester, you know, all the communities that are towns, and what the data is for them with respect to their select board members, school committee members. And so I personally find this comparison not helpful and slanted, because it's not making things apples to apples. And I really think if there's going to be discussion about this, that an effort needs to be made to actually make an analysis that's apples to apples.
So I think, you know, you could, we can update that chart, and I think you could, you know, I think you could use those numbers to argue that maybe you would support a smaller stipend number. That chart, you need to multiply all of the dollars on that chart by about 30%, increase them by about 30% to account for inflation between 2020 and 2029, which is when the stipends would go into full effect. And so that's, you know, everything there is out of date right now, and it will be even more out of date in 3 years. So I think the $6 or $7 that you mentioned would be much more in line once you do that.
That really depends on what happens at other communities. And so if you have this information from other communities as of today, then you could update that chart.
We did, and we showed that to you last time.
Okay, I don't recall that, so I will have to look at that again.
We didn't do the dollars per person, but we did the can I share my screen?
Yeah, hold on.
We did look at the salaries. Some of the numbers have not gone up in the way that they should have. So some of them have gone up, like Newton has gone up by you know, that 30%. Somerville's gone up. I think they've all gone up by roughly 30% ish. Maybe
Well,
Boston has only gone up by like 20%, but
Cambridge hasn't gone up by 30%, and Quincy
yeah, so
has,
Cambridge
certainly
hasn't.
not the mayor. I mean,
You got 17 to 25, 25
well,
to
I mean,
43.
I
10
think
to
it's
13.
great. It's great to be able to update the information and the populations, right? So that whatever it is you're doing, you're making your column, that the information is tying together.
I mean, I think it's also probably complicated too to put a dollar amount, because the base cost of housing here, or of covering, you know, a babysitter or a whatever cost you're trying to cover for a person who's has to physically attend a meeting, instead of doing their caregiving or other responsibilities, that cost is probably different here than it is in Boston or Cambridge or Quincy or Newton. It's maybe more similar here to Boston than it is here to Malden or Lexington. I don't know, but
I guess really my question is, what about other towns? What about our comparable towns? What about Wells?
I don't have that.
I think those would be better comparables than Boston or Quincy or Cambridge. That's who we compete with, certainly on the school side.
Yeah, that makes sense, Cliff. And I think we should look at all of that. One thing I appreciated in particular about the ERSC report was the recommendation that someone on the select board be a point person on economic development. And one of the things I've been thinking about is what will it take to have the caliber of people and candidates? And they may be existing now, or there may be people who have not chosen for all kinds of reasons to put their hat in the ring to play such a role. So I'd be curious. One of the things I wanted to put forward in thinking about what compensation looks like is what is that the cost, the calculation that one makes in thinking about entering public office, in addition to the other goals that we have. This is one idea I want to put on the table, while acknowledging 100% that we should add more research to what's there.
Yeah. So I'll tell you that that recommendation was a recommendation that also, BFAC made, and certainly one that I totally support. It's not one that the select board supports, and it's not one that the town administrator supports. And there are reasons for that actually are, have some validity. And so that would lead to a different discussion, which I'm happy to have with you offline, because we'll probably just go down too many rabbit holes here. Elise.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to make the statement and or ask the questions of, like, my general understanding is that this warrant article is being brought to the fore precisely because of our town structure and the way that it's set up. And right now, the only folks who can really even run for our executive office and or these sort of time-consuming offices, have to have the time, and in order to have the time, that means you have to have your own income that supports this, let alone a campaign and running, and that these stipends are just meant to sort of level that playing field in this particular governmental structure. Am I misunderstanding that?
What? Let me ask you, what do you mean level what playing field?
So
because I want to just go back and look at the list of current and former school committee members,
sure,
who all who worked, and there's been comments that the people who run for these offices have the time and the money. Well, people make the time, whether they're working or not.
So I don't think you're wrong, Cliff, but I mean, when we talk about executive office and people who can afford to take the kind of time it takes to do this work on either of these particular boards or commissions, however you want to identify them. Yeah, these are very highly educated people, and they have jobs that don't require them to, let's say, if I were working at Walmart, I wouldn't be able to be here right now because I would be on a shift. So there are certain types of jobs that allow us to even have these conversations. So there are certain types of incomes that allow us to have these types of conversations. And so tell me if I'm wrong, and I'm completely understand if I am. My understanding is that this warrant article is trying to level that playing field a little bit more in some way. And if we're operating from that framework, then I think it's going to be difficult to compare ourselves as a town entity to city entities. No?
Well, so that may be, but the petitioners are the ones who put forth these comparisons, right? Those tables in the warrant explanation did not came from the petitioners, and so that is part of their argument, right? And I would say that there have been certainly many people who've run for at least town meeting who I would not say have a lot of money or have jobs that provide them with comfort.
Oh, I hear you.
And-
I'm one of those town meeting members. I hear you 100%. But this is not a blanket statement.
I'm talking about for executive office. There's an individual on advisory who ran for select board 2 or 3 times. And was never elected, but also would not be considered someone who has a significant income, or would be able to devote this time easily.
Right.
Well, let's be fair. Nobody can devote this time easily. This is a lot of time that we spend on these things. But I guess my question is, what is the framework that we're working from here? Because I feel like I've been seeing comparisons to other cities, other towns, and that's hard to quantify, certainly within Brookline's specific context. So I'm wanting to figure that baseline out, and then, oh wait, what did Margaret say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just comparing. I was just looking at the information that was in the warrant article explanation. Okay, which had this chart and a few others, and responding to comments made last time we met. So this isn't a chart that I put together at all. This came from petitioners. Anyway, I think, I don't know who was first. Alec?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Thanks, Cliff. Just because I am writing this up, and I wanted to try and get some kind of estimate of what the additional benefit obligation would be for the stipend amounts in the resolution. So I just wanted to ask Anne, while we have the benefit of your presence and knowledge here, to try and come up with a very high level estimate. I just went to the FY27 financial plan and took total pension spending and divided it by total salaries to try and estimate what percentage of salaries are required for those costs. And the percentage you get from that is about 19.2%. And then if you multiply that number by the total 365,000 in stipends, you get about $70,000. Does that sound like a reasonable methodology for a rough estimate?
It's a good try. We get the number for pension obligations in coordination with the retirement board.
Okay.
So I can understand your logic in trying to do that calculation in that way, but it's sort of fed into the retirement board, computer to figure that out. That would be a more detailed conversation either with Patrick Lydon, who's the director, or Lincoln, who's on the retirement board, to be able to talk about that calculation, because it assumes, the obligation assumes some return on investment. That's done every 2 years. There's, all the other,
Right.
other
That's a good
pieces
point.
of that. So I appreciate, as a budget and tax person before I was HR, I appreciate, the calculation. What I will say to an earlier comment is that having done class and comp for Boston before coming here at the city council and mayor level, because they have a commission that does this. One of the questions particularly was around, the salaries for Boston City Council, and it's a weak, council form of government, but also does increasing the pay increase, the opportunities for people to run. And I think that's what, having not been to the earlier meetings, I think that's what you're looking at, to be able to broaden the applicant pool. The data that I looked at back then, and it can change, because we're now in post-COVID times, is that while the increase in salary in those cases, brought more income, it also resulted in a higher cost to run for election because of the higher pay. So it's the get up and go money to say, I want to throw my hat in the ring, and getting that startup money if the compensation, however you structure it, is different. So I offer that as information from past experience. It doesn't really answer your question, but yeah, the calculation and the corollary would be a linking question. I don't know that it's that direct.
That's helpful. So I will run that by Lincoln, but I guess my sense then from your answer would be that if the major unaccounted for variable there is appreciation of the investment, then the 70K would be kind of an upper limit, because it would at least be partially offset, or you'd expect it in a typical long run
Yeah, we hope.
investment pattern, right? That you should see some savings there. So that's helpful. And then just the one other thing I wanted to clarify with you, to make sure when I go to Lincoln, I have my I's and T's here. For employees whose salaries are paid from one of the enterprise or revolving funds, are their pension obligations also paid out of those funds, or do they come from the general fund still?
Again, that would be a linking question, but I
Okay.
believe if the source of the compensation is from a particular space, there is money put aside from that to
Okay.
do it, but don't hold me to it.
I just want to make sure I have the right denominator. So, okay,
Yep.
That's helpful. Thank you, Ann.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Cliff. And I want to thank you for the research that you brought to us about the school committee, their backgrounds, and I know the candidate that you're referencing, the person who's run more than once for select board, makes sense. That gives some good examples in terms of how accessibility is possible. I want to put it in a different frame, which I think I want to name, this is for me, of what brought me to this Warren article and why I wanted to be involved, is my experience in noticing how town meeting has changed, in particular because of what we're doing right now, which is having this conversation over Zoom. I mean, the reality that town meeting can now happen virtually has made it much more accessible for so many members to be involved in town meeting and town government, has dealt with some of the opportunity costs and the barriers that has made it difficult. And I know this, having talked to many others, has asked me to ask the question and think about what are other means by which one could have accessibility to town government. And I think once you get to the executive level and think about that opportunity cost, and whether that's thinking about childcare or income that you would not be able to earn from a business if you're independently employed, or work that you would do otherwise if you had clients, et cetera, and really thinking about what it would take to be involved. I just wanted to put on the table, one of the things I'm thinking a lot about and why I am a co-petitioner here is what makes it possible to make it more accessible for people to be involved in government. And I think that at a certain point, that opportunity cost has a dollar amount attached to it. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Thank you. Tom.
So, first of all, thank you so much for that table of school committee members. That did not take a small amount of time. I appreciate that. And I know not all, a good chunk of them, of the ones with children. I can tell you that in some cases there was a very supportive spouse that was able to put in the work. In at least one case, the person who did not run until the kids were much older. The one factor that the table is missing, then is tricky, is the age of the kids. There was at least one person on there that, except for Mariah, that had very little kids when she was there. And that person happened to have a very supportive spouse. Another case that I know of that had very little kids, the person, money was not an issue, let's put it this way. So the question is not, so I'm not saying there have never been people with kids on the school committee, but their circumstances were such that it was possible. At least one person that I know of did not run until the kids were much older and would have run earlier otherwise, potentially, if she could. So the questions to me that I'm wondering, and what got me into this a little bit is who would have run and would have been great and didn't. So, and that's of course something we can't easily tell. We don't easily know. The place where I went, this is not, I know it's going a little bit to the side. I have to say I'm speaking entirely for myself. I'm not comfortable with the whole pensions issue at all. And the reason is that's not why I was in it for. I don't think that anyone's going to run for future pension money. I don't think we can afford that personally at this point. My point was really to try and facilitate running in the moment. If you do have a child in kindergarten and a child at BEEP, can you hire a babysitter for those long nights? And so I still have to digest this whole pension thing. This is why I put a question forth to Alex about what would happen if we were to just reimburse for dependent care instead of doing a stipend. But I do think, I really do appreciate that table. To me, looking at that table, that's sort of, I could go through almost every person that I knew there and say, okay, so I know this story, I know this story, I know this story, and I know this story. And I know why they ran with kids and why they could do it and what the circumstances sort of were. I also know people who told me I can't and I won't, even though they could have been great and were very involved, but they just, the answer so many times was, I can't do all these evenings. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. In terms of comparisons of towns to cities, that's a really, really interesting question that you've asked. I wasn't involved in the preparation of any of these tables. To me, unless we resolve the pension issue in some way, it's almost a moot question. But I do think that at the end of the day, school committee and and the AC and the select board, they're charitable work. There's unless we really go to salary, it's volunteer work. And I don't think that the $5,000 or $10,000 even stipend takes it away from the volunteer realm. It's really just about facilitating this in some way, facilitating the people who say, I can't do the evenings right now. Like I said, my personal story is I couldn't do it to my spouse because he can't handle the burden. So it's like, it would be one more thing to add on to his plate for my whim, essentially, for my interest. So yeah, that's basically, it's sort of an all over the place answer, just to say that I really appreciate this work. I think you're asking some excellent questions. I also have to think through a lot of it. I'm like I said, I'm not in town meeting. I've never been as involved in any of these bodies. So a lot of this is new to me as well. And I really appreciate the work and the time you guys are putting into this. And it's really been great food for thought.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to say? Okay. Well, if that's the case, then does anyone want to make a motion? Okay, I will. So a motion is going to be made. I will make a motion for favorable action, because that's the way that we should always approach these things, with a positive perspective, even if you vote no. And if someone wants to second it,
I'll second it.
Okay, Alec, thank you. Elise is still processing, so I won't call on her first. Alec.
As I mentioned in the last meeting, I'll be abstaining on this article, so I'll abstain.
Okay. Margaret.
No, as written.
Elise.
I'm struggling.
Okay. I will vote then. So I typically abstain on resolutions because I feel that advisory really just shouldn't get involved with things that so often are outside the purview of what advisory is supposed to be doing. This particular resolution, I feel differently because it has such an economic impact, and we're supposed to be the finance committee, and the budget stuff is something that I certainly spent a lot of time with. And I'm going to vote no for all the reasons I think that I've said before. Elise, you're up. If you you can abstain if you want. You can certainly continue to ponder this until we come to full advisory.
I mean, I still have a lot of questions. I think about like if we're going to focus on school committee, right? Given some of what the school committee candidates platforms that they're running on, if we're putting any sort of stipend or town money to this, what does that mean? There are certain political issues that I'm not sure should be financially funded. I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about what I don't know, if that makes sense. So I'll abstain.
Okay, Margaret.
I don't believe in abstention, which is why I voted no, but it's not a no because I don't like the principle of it, because I think I made it really clear last time that I do like the principle of this.
I love the principle of it.
Yeah, like it's
I
really
love
just
the principle of it.
my only issue is just the pension cost, because I know we're not gonna find that money. And like I'm concerned if this goes in front of town meeting and then it gets voted down, it'll be really hard to bring anything in this vein forward again. And so like that's just my only thought process, but like I don't want this to die. And I do fundamentally think that there are equity issues in Brookline that we don't need to rehash. We talked about them, but like, yeah, like I think Tal even brought up, can we like reimburse for something, maybe the limit is like, okay, fine, we have to do 4,999. Maybe that's something we can do. As written, it's a no, but I
Like,
hope
is
this
there
doesn't.
is there a thoughtful amendment we can make to
I don't
this?
want this to go away because
Yeah.
I think the worst thing it can do is go away, because then a lot of people will read it as there's no problem, which is not true. And I know, somebody might say, well, people, and as Cliff mentioned, there's more diversity here than as it appears. And like, don't just look at who won, look at like who ran. Okay, but like who won is like who's serving. And like one could also argue that maybe you win because you had more resources and you could hustle harder in that campaign. So yeah, I would love to see this come back and like get amended or something.
So this is the third time this has been brought up to town meeting in the last, Marissa, how many years has it been? 6 years? Over the last 6 years? In the last 6 years. So I think the general rule is if something gets brought to town meeting, it gets voted down. It takes a couple of years before it's allowed to come back. So I don't think it would die. I think it's a topic that will get airtime again, because if people want to. But if there's something that can be modified for this town meeting that works for the petitioner, well, I shouldn't say it like that. The petitioner can bring anything to town meeting that it wants and to advisory. And the vote of this subcommittee means little in the overall scope of things because, you know, once we go to full advisory, what the subcommittee did disappears, sort of, right?
Well, like, could I work with the petitioner, for instance, like given my role on the subcommittee to sort of think through some possibilities and an amendment?
Sure, and you can, you're not limited by anything, okay?
Okay.
At all. The only thing you're limited by is having discussions with your subcommittee members.
Okay.
The Senate constitutes a quorum, so that's all you need to worry about. But otherwise, sure. If the petitioners are interested in that, and they may not be, this may be,
Yeah, that's okay.
you know, and that's fine. As we heard that, we had that discussion last time, and just remember what Mr. Toffel said. So yeah, so you're abstaining. Is that correct?
As written, yes.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so by a vote of 0-2 to 2, the subcommittee will recommend no action on this warrant article. And if prior to our presentation of full advisory, which is currently scheduled for anyone?
Oh my God, let me bring it
I
back.
just looked this up.
I just saw it.
It is the
You said it's the 14th.
14th of
14th.
April.
Thank you. Then, you know, you can bring it back, or you can just offer us a different suggestion to full advisory. It doesn't have to come back through us. Or obviously just keep moving down the road, the path that you've designed. You know, Marissa, you know the way it works. So.
And maybe I'll just add here, I will, per your guidance to Margaret on the previous articles, I will start working on this report. I will also reach out to Lincoln Heineman for confirmation on the estimates that we discussed this evening. And certainly if any of the petitioners have anything else they'd like to run by Lincoln, please let me know. Happy to include that in my email.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand like what a pension obligation actually costs, and I'm a little confused like why we don't even understand that for like if we were trying to add an FTE of like an employee, why we wouldn't understand that. If that makes sense, because it feels like we're sort of trying to do the same thing for the select board and the school committee to make them employees, but like not have to pay them health insurance.
Well, I think this is where, per the discussion, we need Lincoln to weigh in, because Lincoln will have the perspective of being on the retirement board. Yeah. Because the variable here that we don't understand, at least based on my understanding of the conversation, is what kind of appreciation might you expect from the invested funds to offset what the best estimate I can give you right now is, which is what is our current pension obligation costs in a given year versus what we pay in salaries. So I'm going to try and get more direction from Lincoln on that estimate, and see if he has better guidance to give us. But I see, Cliff, it looks like maybe you have a thought on that.
So I mean, I have a couple of thoughts, but I just want to clarify one thing with Ann. Ann, is the vesting, is it cliff vesting? You're not vested at all until after 10 years, or it's
correct.
Proportional
So if you only have 9 years and 11 months and however many days, you get back what you put in when you decide to divest from the retirement fund. And usually that money goes, usually gets rolled over into a qualified retirement account. So it can go into a Roth or a 401k or whatever else, but it has to be rolled over. You don't have to do it at the time that you leave, but you have to do it, you know, when you're going to take your money out and do that. Some folks will leave it if they're a newer employee, so they're newer in their employment journey. They will leave it so that they don't have to pay it back for creditable service if they decide 10 years later they're going to go back into municipal service or state service, because it can follow you. Others will just take it out and roll it over into a 401k. And that's up to them. The timing is up to them. And so that's where it gets a little dicey. So
Okay, thank you. So Alec, maybe I just wasn't quite understanding what you were saying. So the rate of return that is earned in the pension fund from PREAC, or you're using that as a proxy for what?
Well, so the rough estimate I produced was just total pension costs in 27 divided by total salaries in 27. That gives you the 19.2%, which you could then extrapolate as the average, pension markup above salaries. So when you apply that percentage to the new total stipend amount, it gives you this, what I'd call now an upper limit estimate on what the pension obligations would be, which is a little over 70,000. And the reason why I was calling that an upper limit was, per Ann's earlier comment, one thing that we can't account for in that calculation is what kind of appreciation the money is earning as invested, invested funds from the pensions. And that's where I think Lincoln, with his positionality, both as the finance director and on the retirement board, may be able to offer some clarity.
So the earnings, vary year to year. They're obviously not constant, right? So you can look at, actually, you can go online and see what PREAC has earned each of the last several years. That's different than the assumed rate of return we use when calculating our unfunded pension liability, which is also something that you can find out, but I'm not sure either of those really help in this context. And what the town is paying this year, unless you're separating out, well, we're making contributions along a schedule designed to have us fully funded by 2030, our unfunded liability. And so it really bears no relation to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The existing salary base.
So perhaps I'll just approach Lincoln more broadly and ask him, look, what would we expect to pay in terms of, right. No, that's a good point.
The other thing is that, we're making two certain sort of payments. One is to fully fund the unfunded liability, and the other is the actual payments we need to make to retirees. But the payments we make to retirees, that's for, work they did a long time ago. And so, again, I don't think that necessarily bears any relation to an overall salary that we're paying people now.
Right. And those costs wouldn't begin to accrue until at least 10 years after the increase in the stipends.
I'm sure Lincoln can give you some back of the envelope suggestion. Yeah, Marissa.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, the article as written says that the total cost of compensation would be, the 20,000 for the school committee or the 35,000 for the select board. So if we think that that we can get a number of, like, over time the pensions are going to cost, this much money, you could subtract that out and then that would be the take home pay for the select board or school committee members. Like, I think like the goal of the way we wrote it was so that if there were any benefit costs, that would be incorporated in the total cost of compensation. We're intending to give an upper limit of the cost to the town.
So that's another question I'm happy to pose to Lincoln when I ask him for estimates is, let's assume that the 365 is just pure stipend compensation. What would be on top of that? And then I'll also pose to him, well, what if that were the cap on total compensation? Then what would the take home stipend number be for both select board and school committee members under the proposed model? I'm happy to pose those questions.
Anne?
I was just going to say another factor that comes into it is how long somebody lives after they are collecting their pension.
Right.
And what provision under option A, B, C, or D they are pensioned.
I have one more question for the petitioners. Why do you think the select board members deserve more than the school committee members? And I ask that because from my perspective, the school committee members do a lot more work. And I'm really just kind of curious. Is it because there's so many school committee members relative to select board members? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do that just solves a lot of problems down the road is to make the stipends cost the public the same amount of money, so that then when you take in the money and you divide it into town and school side, then you're dividing it equally.
So it sort of
I mean, there's also a lot of school committee members.
well, there are, but you know, the school committee members, they've got subcommittees, right? And those subcommittees, they do a fair amount of work. And certainly chairs of those subcommittees do a fair amount of work. And you know, they're on more than one subcommittee. Yeah, and yeah, the select board members, they have special committees they might get assigned to, you know, for a real estate project or something like that. But it's sort of it feels like you're discriminating against the school committee members because again, from my perspective, they just do a lot more. They spend a lot more time. There are much greater demands. But I mean, I could be wrong. It's just my own perception. I'm just kind of curious.
I mean, I'm not gonna like the 35-20 split is not the hill I'm gonna die on. It's like if you think that it's
really philosophically, it's a philosophical question. That's all. I'm not.
It
here
was
to
really just meant
get
to
my-
match them. That was really the main thing.
I mean, the other piece is that the select board is technically supposed to be liaisons to a lot more boards and commissions. However, they have the choice whether or not to be a liaison to some of these. Whereas the school committee, the way that it's structured, there's no choice. So I could see where if you're going to try to take a financial even split, I mean, that still makes sense to me. Like, so that the town doesn't think that we're giving more to one or the other, however you want to frame it. But, you know, perhaps if the select board actually did more of these committees, they would be doing equal amounts of work.
I was just curious. That's all.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, when we were looking at comparatives of other towns and cities and trying to imagine and trying to make as best the apples to apples, and I know, again, I appreciate the feedback on the chart. It seemed like the select board being the oversight, like the collective executive of the town over multiple issues versus the schools is why when I first saw the numbers presented as we developed them, it seemed to make sense, but I can't argue with Cliff. I certainly know many hardworking school committee members. I really can't argue with you about the argument you're making here.
Yeah. Plus, the schools have a much larger percentage of the budget than the town does. Right. So, anyway, okay. Elise, I appreciate you volunteering to do this yeoman's work and talk to the petitioners. And under any set of circumstances, Marissa, I'm sure you're going to get a warm reception at town meeting. And wish you good luck with it.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to, well, see, I guess I need to take a vote, right? Okay. I'm going to make a motion to close the public meeting tonight. Thank you.
Second.
So, great. Elise,
Yes.
Margaret.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alec.
Yes.
Your votes yes. Thanks so much, everybody. Talk to you
Thank you.
soon.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.